Xavier Philippe, le tueur d'associés. C'est comme ça que la presse l'a surnommé. Et c'est vrai que le sort s'est acharné sur tous ceux avec qui il était en affaire. La boîte de nuit de son frère jumeau a brûlé, la sienne aussi. Son premier associé a disparu. Le deuxième, un des rois de la nuit parisienne, a échappé à une tentative d'assassinat. Quant au troisième, il est mort, criblé de balles. Alors, Xavier Philippe, un homme qui porte malheur ou un criminel machiavélique qui a échappé pendant plus de 20 ans à la justice? C'est en enquêtant sur le meurtre d'un pâtissier du Marais que les policiers vont découvrir l'extraordinaire vie à tiroir de Xavier Philippe. Ce 17 mai 2005, comme tous les après-midi, les policiers du Val-de-Marne font leur ronde dans Sucy-en-Brie.
Aux alentours de 15h, 15h05, on a reçu un appel par notre standard du commissariat de Sucy-en-Brie qui nous avisait qu'une personne avait découvert une personne allongée au sol dans un petit bois près du lycée Christophe Colomb à Sucy-en-Brie.
Le petit bois du Piple, à quelques minutes de là.
On a marché à peu près sur une 50aine de mètres et c'est là qu'on a découvert une personne gisant sur le sol. Cette personne avait des blessures au niveau de la tête. Ces blessures nous ont semblé très graves dans la mesure où il s'agissait de 2 orifices. Et puis en dessous du visage, il y avait une flaque de sang. Tout de suite, on a pensé que ça ne pouvait être que provoqué par une arme à feu.
Dans la forêt, les policiers remarquent tout à coup quelque chose qui n'a rien à faire là.
On a découvert un petit sachet en plastique qui se trouvait à proximité du corps de cet homme. Dans ce petit sachet en plastique se trouvaient des traces de poudre blanchâtre. Et on a également retrouvé de la poudre sur la végétation. Donc ça s'apparentait à de la drogue.
Les policiers alertent le parquet de Créteil qui saisit dans l'urgence la brigade criminelle de Paris. Une demi-heure plus tard, les hommes du quai des Orfèvres débarquent à leur tour dans le petit bois de Sucy-en-Brie.
On arrive à ce corps qui est allongé, qui est couché sur le ventre, légèrement en bascule sur son bras droit. On manipule et on va retrouver non pas 2 orifices mais 3 orifices. Donc effectivement il y en avait 2 sur l'arrière du crâne et un qui était un petit peu plus bas, moins visible et que les premiers intervenants finalement ils sont passés à côté.
3 tirs. Les policiers fouillent les feuillages avec des chiens et des détecteurs de métaux, mais ils ne retrouvent ni armes, ni douilles. Puis ils examinent le crâne de la victime.
On a des orifices qui sont de 5-6 mm. Pour nous, on n'a pas, en tout cas pour moi, il n'y a pas d'orifice de sortie, il n'y a que des orifices d'entrée, donc 3. Tout petit calibre, donc du 6,35 a priori, confirmé ensuite par la balistique.
Si les douilles sont restées dans le barillet, c'est qu'il s'agit probablement d'un revolver 6,35, une arme ancienne qui n'est plus beaucoup utilisée.
C'est une arme qui a pu être diffusée dans un certain volume à une époque, mais on est quand même sur la fin 19e, début 20e, sur quelque chose qui n'est pas forcément très pratique et qui n'a pas un grand intérêt sinon pour un collectionneur ou un passionné d'armes.
Selon le médecin légiste, l'homme a été tué ici, entre 2h et 4h du matin le 17 mai. Le corps n'a pas été déplacé et il n'a pas été frappé.
En retournant le corps, on va trouver un mégot de cigarette qui est coincé sous lui. C'est une cigarette à peine entamée, de même marque que le paquet qu'on va trouver dans ses poches.
Pas de traces de lutte. Une cigarette à moitié consumée. Un casque abandonné près du corps et une moto garée sur le parking à 2 pas de là. Pour les policiers, la victime s'est aventurée dans ce bois au milieu de la nuit, en toute confiance.
On a effectivement un scénario a posteriori qui nous remet dans l'ambiance du moment où on se dit oui voilà, on a un type qui a cheminé visiblement de la moto jusqu'à l'endroit où il tombe, c'est là qu'il meurt et il est abattu de dos avec au moins 2 coups de feu. On est sur quelqu'un qui s'est fait abattre par un individu qui sans doute le connaissait. Effectivement, on pense à cette relation, à cette possibilité de trafic de cocaïne qui a mal tourné, ça se passe très souvent.
Un consommateur ou peut-être un trafiquant de drogue. Les enquêteurs fouillent le sac et les poches de la victime.
Dans ces vêtements, on va retrouver une pièce d'identité et la carte grise de la moto qui vont nous identifier notre victime comme étant Christophe Bell, domicilié rue Vieille du Temple.
Nathalie Bell, vous êtes la sœur aînée de Christophe Bell. Comment avez-vous appris la mort de votre frère?
Ma belle-sœur m'a téléphoné un matin à 6h15, le mercredi matin, c'est-à-dire le lendemain des faits. Et c'est elle qui m'a annoncé le décès de mon frère.
Et qu'est-ce qu'elle vous a dit?
Elle m'a dit on a retrouvé Christophe dans un bois tué par balle. Là, j'étais comme anesthésiée, je crois. Je n'ai pas compris. Après, elle m'a demandé, elle m'a dit qu'est-ce que je vais faire. Je lui ai dit écoute, je ne sais pas, mais je ne comprenais rien.
Mais quel âge avait-il, votre frère?
Christophe avait 40 ans.
Il était marié, il avait des enfants, il
vivait avec Sandrine, il avait 2 enfants, il vivait à Courbevoie dans un appartement, une vie simple.
Et quel genre d'homme était-il?
C'était un artiste, un passionné par son travail. Il avait consacré tout son temps à fabriquer des gâteaux. Il était naïf, oui, artiste.
Et il avait toujours eu envie comme ça de faire des gâteaux?
Très tôt, vers l'âge de 10 ans, il avait dit qu'il serait pâtissier. À 14 ans, il a pris une orientation, il était pré-apprenti et après il a fait son apprentissage et voilà, il a été diplômé, il n'a fait que ça.
Vous avez été entendu par les policiers, ils vous parlent de votre frère et qu'est-ce qu'ils veulent savoir en fait?
Ils ont voulu savoir s'il se droguait, ils ont voulu savoir s'il jouait, de l'argent.
Il y avait des zones d'ombre dans sa vie?
Non, il n'y avait pas d'ombre du tout. Il avait une vie simple, rangée. Il allait à la messe le samedi soir parce qu'il ne pouvait pas y aller le dimanche matin. Mais non, c'était une vie très tranquille.
L'adresse de la carte d'identité conduit les policiers dans le quartier du Marais à Paris, devant une boulangerie-pâtisserie plutôt en vogue.
C'est un milieu qui, a priori, n'est pas un milieu de voyous. C'est un commerce qui a pignon sur rue, qui marche bien, qui est implanté dans le 4e arrondissement.
Avec une victime qui est finalement un pâtissier reconnu, et c'est plutôt positif. On n'est pas finalement sur un voyou, sur un trafiquant de drogue, on est loin de cette idée-là.
Mais quand le laboratoire analyse la poudre blanche découverte près du corps de Christophe Bell, il trouve bien de la cocaïne. Pour en avoir le cœur net, les policiers soumettent un cheveu de Christophe Bell à un test toxicologique.
Alors en fait, il faut savoir que les éléments pileux sont des réservoirs à toxines. Donc ça s'élimine de façon très longue et le fait de prélever effectivement un poil ou un cheveu, on peut révéler avec des analyses de labo la présence encore longtemps après de prises de produits stupéfiants. C'est bien sûr ce qu'on a fait, on n'a trouvé aucune prise de produits stupéfiants des mois en arrière.
Christophe Bell vit à Courbevoie, à l'ouest de Paris, avec ses enfants et sa compagne.
La perquisition à son domicile n'a permis de découvrir aucune trace de stupéfiants. Il n'y avait pas d'enrichissement récent de la part de Christophe Bell. Il avait un loyer à payer. Donc nous n'avons trouvé aucun lien entre Christophe Bell et la piste stupéfiant.
Les policiers du 36 ne sont pas vraiment surpris. En fait, ils ont trouvé la scène de crime bizarre dès le départ.
Avant d'aller au corps, il y a ce chemin et qui donne vraiment l'idée d'une scène de crime qui fait un peu crime en scène. Sur tous les croisements ou les orientations à prendre de ce chemin, on va trouver un indice qui va nous conduire à prendre la bonne direction. On va trouver un petit sachet, on va trouver du saupoudrage avec des petits caillots blancs encore sur le côté du chemin.
Il est rare, malgré tout, dans les affaires de règlement de compte sur fond de trafic de stupéfiants, de trouver d'emblée de la poudre éparse. Et notre habitude en matière de crime était d'imaginer que cela pouvait être effectivement des artifices destinés à détourner l'attention, à mener les enquêteurs sur une fausse piste.
On enquête dans le voisinage de Sucy-en-Brie, on se renseigne de la possible implantation d'un trafic sur place, de personnalités qui se livrent au trafic de stupéfiants. Est-ce que ce bois est connu pour être un lieu de vente? En fait, tout ça, non.
À cet endroit précisément, non. Aucun trafic de stupéfiants connu. Non, rien du tout, non.
Ça va conforter notre idée du début qui nous fait penser à un jeu de piste qui va nous conduire jusqu'au corps qu'on veut forcément nous voir découvrir. Une mise en scène.
Les policiers n'ont pas d'armes, pas d'empreintes, pas de traces ADN, juste une énigme. Ce pâtissier assassiné en pleine nuit de 3 balles dans un sous-bois où il n'allait jamais. Deuxième jour d'enquête. Au 36 quai des Orfèvres, on reconstitue l'emploi du temps du pâtissier. D'après sa compagne, Christophe Bell s'est levé tôt cette nuit du 17 mai, vers 2 h du matin. Et il est parti en moto comme d'habitude pour aller de Courbevoie à la pâtisserie en plein cœur de Paris. Sucy-en-Brie n'est pas du tout sur sa route.
On est à l'opposé de Courbevoie, on est vraiment dans un rayon très loin de la rue Vieille du Temple dans le Marais. Christophe Bell, effectivement, conduisait la moto, mais c'était pour des trajets toujours calculés, c'était quelqu'un qui se perdait facilement, il a le même sens d'orientation que moi, très mauvais. Il aimait pas trop sortir un peu de son périmètre et se retrouver à 20 km de Paris, dans un bois, après un petit chemin qu'il faut encore trouver dans la nuit, si on s'en réfère aux heures à peu près du décès possible, ça colle pas.
Les employés de la boulangerie ainsi que son associé Xavier Philippe confirment tous que Christophe Bell devait venir travailler vers 4 h pour lancer la première fournée de pain.
Je suis arrivée le matin, le boulanger n'était pas là, tout était fermé. Je suis montée, j'ai tapé. Il m'a dit non, que c'était pas lui qui devait ouvrir, c'était Christophe. Bon, peut-être qu'il est en retard. Et donc on a ouvert avec le boulanger. À 7 h, il n'y avait pas de Christophe. Xavier, il est arrivé, on a commencé à chercher partout. Il a appelé les commissariats, il a appelé, il a appelé tous ceux qui pouvaient appeler. Et, personne n'avait les nouvelles de Christophe. Là, on a commencé à s'inquiéter. La chose à laquelle tout le monde a pensé, c'est un accident, parce qu'on ne voyait pas comment il aurait pu arriver en retard. Non, Christophe n'arrivait jamais en retard. Jamais, jamais. Puis après, vers 18 h, il y a une de mes collègues qui m'a appelée en pleurs. Qu'est-ce qui se passe? Elle me dit Christophe, il est mort. Bon.
Alors tous les gens de la boulangerie, la première réaction, ça va être une réaction très affective. Ils vont être vraiment très perturbés par la mort de Christophe Bell. Quand ils vont savoir en plus que c'est un meurtre, qu'on n'est pas sur un accident de la route, ça va les choquer évidemment. Et puis là, à nous aussi d'arriver à les calmer un petit peu, d'engager une discussion et de leur mettre en avant qu'on a besoin, nous, d'avancer et de trouver celui qui l'a tué. Il faut savoir dépasser ça et puis aller investiguer et puis pousser nos témoins à raconter et puis à nous donner de la matière, puisqu'on ne connaît pas Christophe Bell au départ.
Peu à peu, le portrait du pâtissier se dessine.
Pas de double vie, une vie rangée, une épouse qu'il aime, avec qui il a un enfant, une vie à Courbevoie. On est sur quelqu'un, un travailleur, un passionné de pâtisserie, et tous ces employés vont en plus nous dire que c'était quelqu'un de très bien, de très agréable, attentionné.
L'ambiance était vraiment familiale. On se sentait vraiment bien à la boulangerie. C'était comme si on était à la maison. Il n'y avait pas de barrière patron, employé. C'était vraiment un lieu convivial.
Les patrons, ce sont Christophe Bell et son associé Xavier Philippe. Ils se sont rencontrés à la fin des années 90 quand Christophe réalisait des pâtisseries excentriques pour le Banana Café, un bar branché du milieu gay. Tout le monde raconte que Christophe Bell avait des doigts en or. Il sculptait des pièces montées en sucre, comme ce gâteau violon pour l'anniversaire de Catherine Lara.
Il savait vraiment se servir de ses mains. Et il faisait vraiment de belles choses.
En 2000, Christophe et Xavier décident de monter une société ensemble, l'Avion d'Hélice, une boulangerie haut de gamme, dans laquelle ils se partagent le travail.
Xavier Philippe, lui, s'occupe plutôt du volet comptabilité. C'est lui qui effectivement, au départ du commerce, va apporter finalement une grosse partie de la mise de fonds. Christophe Bell se chargeant finalement de payer en nature, c'est-à-dire avec son talent de pâtissier. Ils sont bien associés, en tout cas chacun sa partie, et puis ça marche pas mal.
Ils s'entendaient très bien, on croyait presque que c'était des frères. Ça marchait bien, franchement, ça marchait bien.
Peu à peu, les langues se délient. Xavier Philippe et les employés de la boulangerie se souviennent. Il y a quelques mois, Christophe Bell a été victime de plusieurs agressions. Les pneus de sa moto ont été crevés et il a reçu de nombreux appels téléphoniques malveillants.
Il y a eu également, dans le même temps, des dégradations dans la boulangerie, dans une réserve de la boulangerie qui a été saccagée.
Christophe Bell s'était confié à ses employés. Il savait qui lui en voulait. Un certain Monsieur F, son rival, un pâtissier avec lequel il était en conflit commercial. À la brigade criminelle, on se lance donc sur la piste de ce Monsieur F. Et là, surprise.
Le corps de Christophe Bell a donc été découvert à Sucy-en-Brie, dans un sous-bois. Et on va s'apercevoir en travaillant sur le pâtissier en question qu'il élit domicile, donc à quelques encablures de ce sous-bois, dans la même commune, ce qui évidemment est intéressant.
Il habite à 200 mètres du bois du Piple. Effectivement, l'objectif est trop beau. On a un mobile, si vous voulez, à une dispute et à finalement un règlement de compte entre personnes entre qui ça va pas très bien.
Le 20 mai à 6 h du matin, les policiers débarquent donc chez le boulanger à Sucy-en-Brie.
Nous sommes retrouvés face à son épouse, qui nous a dit immédiatement que son mari n'habitait plus là, qu'il avait changé de vie et qu'il habitait à l'autre bout de Paris, donc à Colombes, ce qui est effectivement radicalement à l'opposé de Sucy-en-Brie.
Monsieur F n'avait pas fait le transfert de son adresse officielle. Voilà 4 ans qu'il vivait ailleurs. Les policiers repartent donc, direction Colombes cette fois, pour l'arrêter.
On lui explique la raison de notre présence. Lui va nous expliquer de manière orale qu'effectivement il est indifférent avec Christophe Bell, mais qui n'engendrerait jamais un conflit ou des extrémités telles que celle de l'assassiné.
Monsieur F est placé en garde à vue au 36 quai des Orfèvres.
Il dit qu'il n'avait aucune raison de commettre ces dégradations pour un motif aussi futile. Et il dira également par la suite que s'il avait voulu assassiner Christophe Bell, jamais il l'aurait fait à proximité de son domicile, tout du moins officiel, hein, même si ce n'est plus celui où il habite réellement, mais c'est le domicile déclaré. On le ressent comme un homme entier qui n'a visiblement pas la volonté de dissimuler quoi que ce soit.
Monsieur F était en Normandie la journée du 16, puis il a passé la nuit des faits chez lui avec sa compagne et s'est rendu à sa boulangerie au petit matin. Monsieur F a un alibi.
Au terme de la garde à vue, nous n'avons aucun élément à charge contre lui.
Monsieur F est libéré, mais juste avant de quitter le quai des Orfèvres, l'ancien rival de Christophe Bell donne son sentiment personnel.
Il trouve quand même très étonnant que l'exécution se soit passée à quelques centaines de mètres de son domicile. Il va jusqu'à émettre l'hypothèse que c'est sciemment que on veut essayer, que la personne, que l'auteur veut orienter les enquêteurs sur sa piste, sur lui.
Il y a quelque chose qui cloche, c'est pas habituel, c'est un peu trop facile et puis les éléments vont pas ensemble.
Une fois de plus, les enquêteurs ont le sentiment d'être manipulés et ils ne voient pas comment Christophe Bell, qui n'a aucun sens de l'orientation, a pu quitter Courbevoie en pleine nuit et atterrir à l'opposé, à Sucy-en-Brie.
Cet élément qui est quand même intéressant laisse supposer que soit Christophe Bell n'est pas venu tout seul sur les lieux du crime, soit qu'il a été accompagné, guidé, et que forcément c'est quelqu'un qu'il connaissait, qu'il appréciait, en qui il faisait confiance. Nous avons pensé rapidement que c'était quelqu'un de son entourage qui pouvait être lié à son assassinat.
Qui a donc attiré Christophe Bell dans le guet-apens de Sucy-en-Brie? Le 24 mai 2005, une information judiciaire contre X est ouverte pour assassinat. La crime va passer au crible tout l'entourage du pâtissier, sa famille, ses amis, ses employés et son associé.
L'associé, il se présente à nous. Au premier appel, il est là. Il aborde déjà un visage très empathique. Il est désespéré. Il a perdu un ami. Et il a en plus la voix de cet ami sur son téléphone portable. Il nous parle d'un message laissé par Christophe Bell sur son téléphone portable la nuit même. Et il nous le fait écouter.
Bon, à tout de suite. Je suis là dans 5-10 minutes. Salut.
Xavier Philippe nous dit d'emblée que pour lui, ce message ne lui était pas du tout destiné, que le Christophe Bell a certainement s'est trompé d'interlocuteur.
Christophe Bell a laissé ce message à 2h55 du matin depuis Courbevoie, sans doute juste avant de partir à moto. Pour Xavier Philippe, c'est sans doute une erreur de manipulation. Seulement voilà, les policiers ont déjà récupéré et examiné le portable de Christophe Bell.
On va lui indiquer quand même que le numéro composé figure dans le répertoire de Christophe Bell entre le numéro de son domicile et un autre numéro qui lui appartient également. Donc l'erreur de manipulation, on essaie de lui dire, c'est pas trop crédible.
Certes, c'est Xavier Philippe qui a parlé de ce message très spontanément. Mais dès cette première audition, le ton de la conversation change.
On s'intéresse toujours aux policiers, au dernier correspondant d'une victime. C'est une indication, c'est 5-10 minutes d'un rendez-vous qui est fixé entre deux personnes. On a une mort dans un délai très proche, il y a un souci.
Nous pensions d'emblée, non pas à l'erreur, mais au fait que Christophe Bell ait eu bel et bien rendez-vous avec Xavier Philippe.
Xavier Philippe est de nouveau interrogé, cette fois sur son emploi du temps. Que faisait-il la nuit du 16 au 17 mai?
Xavier Philippe a le plus vieil alibi du monde. J'étais chez moi dans mon lit et je dormais à côté de ma femme.
Mais de toute façon, j'avais pas rendez-vous avec lui. Moi, j'étais chez moi, je dormais. De toute façon, mon portable était coupé et je n'avais absolument pas rendez-vous avec Christophe. Donc, je comprends pas du tout pourquoi il a laissé un tel message. Sa compagne conforte cet alibi en expliquant que elle a le sommeil léger. Si jamais Xavier Philippe s'était réveillé, serait sorti, elle s'en serait aperçue.
Les policiers ne sont pas vraiment convaincus, d'autant que ce message téléphonique est le premier élément matériel depuis la mort de Christophe Bell. Alors, ils insistent.
C'est vrai qu'on le presse à expliquer ce message, ce qui est naturel. Là, j'ai pas de reproche à faire à la police. C'est quand même 3h du matin, je suis là dans 10 minutes, 12 heures plus tard, 15 heures plus tard, on le retrouve mort. On sait qu'il a été tué avant 5 heures. C'est une charge indéniable. Donc évidemment, il est pressé, on lui demande de s'expliquer sur ce message.
Il va prétendre que Christophe Bell l'appelait fréquemment la nuit, qu'il pouvait l'appeler et lui avoir laissé un message sans pour autant avoir rendez-vous avec lui. Le fait est que les vérifications téléphoniques ont été effectuées. Nous sommes aperçus que c'était faux, à savoir que dans les derniers mois, jamais Christophe Bell, même dans la dernière année, Christophe Bell n'avait appelé Xavier Philippe durant la nuit.
Il essaye de collaborer et de trouver une explication, Et ça va l'enfoncer parce qu'aucune explication n'est véritablement la bonne. Et en plus, la seule qu'attend les enquêteurs, c'est « j'avais bien rendez-vous avec lui ».
Xavier Philippe, l'ami, l'associé de Christophe Bell, est désormais dans la ligne de mire des policiers. Mais il leur manque encore l'essentiel, des preuves et un mobile. Un mois après le crime, un nouvel élément conforte leur intuition. La femme du pâtissier découvre que le bénéficiaire de l'assurance décès de son mari, ce n'est pas elle, c'est Xavier Philippe. Nathalie Bell, vous étiez très proche de votre frère, et cette assurance décès prise au nom de Xavier Philippe, est-ce que ça lui ressemble ?
Mon frère m'avait téléphoné un mardi soir, alors qu'il se rendait chez Xavier Philippe, pour contracter une assurance pour Sandrine et les enfants. Il m'avait dit il faut que je les mette à l'abri du besoin s'il m'arrivait quelque chose. Donc je lui dis évidemment oui, parce que je lui dis tu fais ton trajet en moto, il est évident qu'il peut t'arriver quelque chose. Donc je connaissais évidemment cette assurance.
À partir du moment où vous avez découvert le nom de Xavier Philippe sur cette assurance décès, qu'est-ce que vous avez pensé ?
J'ai pensé que c'était pas possible. J'ai pensé qu'il y avait une erreur quelque part. Et j'ai commencé à douter. J'ai commencé à penser qu'il y avait quelque chose et qu'il était sans doute responsable de quelque chose qui n'était pas très clair, quoi.
Alors comment on peut expliquer ça ? Qu'est-ce que vous avez pensé ?
Mon frère s'occupait de la boutique, donc il était au rez-de-chaussée, il faisait ses gâteaux toute la journée, et Xavier était payé pour s'occuper de l'administratif. Donc un jour, Xavier Philippe a demandé à mon frère de venir signer les papiers d'assurance. Mon frère a signé, a mis la date, a signé, sans savoir vraiment ce qu'il signait. Il y avait plusieurs contrats, donc c'est vrai que c'était un petit peu compliqué pour lui, je pense. Et donc il a signé en faisant entièrement confiance à Xavier Philippe, sans le moindre doute, et puis en lui demandant sans doute de compléter et de les envoyer.
Xavier Philippe aurait-il tué Christophe Bell pour toucher son assurance décès ? Les enquêteurs se penchent sur le contrat. Le montant de l'assurance décès est de 41 000 €. Pas beaucoup pour en faire le mobile d'un assassinat. Et Xavier Philippe a l'air réellement surpris de voir son nom sur ce document. Pour trancher, les enquêteurs font appel à un graphologue.
Des expertises ont été entreprises, mais la signature est bien celle de Christophe Bell.
Mais si ce n'est pas un faux, pourquoi Christophe Bell a-t-il signé cette assurance contraire à ses intentions ?
Le mobile du crime, on dit toujours chercher le mobile, chercher l'argent, chercher la femme. Là, on est clairement sur l'argent, on n'est pas du tout sur la femme. L'argent, il est dans les tiroirs caisses de l'avion d'hélice.
Depuis un mois, les policiers n'ont pas lâché la pression sur la boulangerie. Et cela finit par payer.
C'est petit à petit, finalement, qu'on va, au fil des auditions, au fil de nos passages, puisqu'on passe quand même assez souvent dans la rue, on va les voir, on prend la température, on demande s'il y a quelque chose de nouveau. Et c'est comme ça qu'on apprend avec les employés que depuis 2 semaines, 3 semaines, Christophe Bell, il était plus tout à fait pareil, il était énervé, il commençait à vérifier les comptes, il posait des questions aux salariés, comment ça se passe.
Une employée s'était entretenue avec Christophe. Celui-ci lui avait demandé de surveiller un peu plus la marchandise parce qu'il s'était rendu compte qu'il y avait un écart entre les recettes de la boulangerie et la production de la marchandise. L'employé n'a pas eu le temps d'effectuer cette vérification. Christophe Bell a été assassiné entre-temps.
La brigade criminelle plonge son nez dans les comptes. Depuis quelques années, le chiffre d'affaires de la boulangerie augmente régulièrement. Mais bizarrement, dans le même temps, le bénéfice chute. Comme si quelqu'un piquait largement dans la caisse.
On a interrogé les employés sur cet aspect-là, à savoir qui pioche dans la caisse, de quelle manière, comment ça se pratiquait.
Selon les employés, Christophe et Xavier s'autorisaient à prendre du liquide dans la caisse. Mais en pratique, les deux hommes ne se comportaient pas du tout de la même manière.
Le fait est que Christophe Bell piochait occasionnellement dans la caisse d'après les témoignages, mais c'était de l'ordre d'un billet de 20 €.
Xavier Philippe est le seul, en réalité, à prélever de manière massive. C'est assez logique, puisque c'est le comptable de la société. Il prélève dans la caisse, il relève la caisse très très régulièrement, et ensuite il en fait son affaire.
Les tickets de caisse, ils sont arrêtés à une certaine heure. On sait que l'associé, il a la main mise dessus, il se sert, il arrête les comptes à telle heure, et puis le reste, ça n'apparaît pas sur les tickets Z, comme on les appelle.
Les policiers estiment que Xavier Philippe détournait entre 200 et 500 € par jour, soit 6 000 à 12 000 € par mois. Des ponctions que Christophe Bell avait, semble-t-il, fini par remarquer.
Christophe Bell avait, un mot un peu voilé, parlé à plusieurs. D'abord sa compagne. Sa compagne savait qu'il vivait pas bien dans ces derniers temps et qu'il avait, pour la première fois, un discours un peu critique à l'égard de Xavier Philippe. Il faut savoir qu'il avait décidé de travailler tout seul et de se séparer de son associé, ce qui n'est pas normal si on s'entend très bien avec son associé. Ensuite, il avait dit à sa compagne qu'il avait des doutes sur l'honnêteté, et c'est peu dire, de Xavier Philippe, mais également au personnel, qui est témoin d'accrochages entre eux, de propos un peu verts de Christophe Bell à l'égard de Xavier Philippe.
Il avait dû commencer à s'en ouvrir à Xavier Philippe, et nous pensons bien évidemment que c'est une des raisons majeures pour laquelle Xavier Philippe a dû s'inquiéter, paniquer, puisque si tout était découvert au moment de leur séparation, les choses allaient être pour lui dramatique.
On a un mobile, effectivement, on a un suspect en tout cas.
Dans les bureaux du quai des Orfèvres, Xavier Philippe le reconnaît. Oui, il y avait du black à la boulangerie, comme dans beaucoup de petits commerces. Mais ça ne fait pas de lui un tueur.
Xavier Philippe disait qu'il prenait chaque mois 2 000 € pour payer 1 000 € à Christophe et 1 000 € à lui-même, plus une partie supplémentaire pour payer des heures supplémentaires ou des primes aux salariés, et également pour payer certains fournisseurs qu'on ne payait pas intégralement de façon officielle. Bon. Il en avait conclu que les ponctions correspondaient à environ 8% du chiffre d'affaires. Donc les montants hallucinants, puisqu'on a parlé de jusqu'à 10 000 € par mois qui se seraient mis dans la poche, qui sont affirmés noir sur blanc dans le dossier par la brigade criminelle, ne tiennent pas.
Xavier Philippe et sa défense le martèlent. Il n'y a aucune raison de le soupçonner. Mais les hommes de la brigade criminelle n'en démordent pas. Ils pensent que Xavier Philippe s'est débarrassé de Christophe Bell par appât du gain. D'ailleurs, depuis le début de leurs investigations financières, Xavier Philippe se comporte d'une drôle de manière avec ses employés.
Chaque audition, effectivement, donnera lieu à quasiment un contre-interrogatoire de la part de l'associé au retour à la boutique. Évidemment, qu'est-ce qu'ils vous ont dit? Ils ont une piste? Qu'est-ce qui se passe? Tout ça, effectivement, ça nous est rapporté à l'audition suivante. Ça énerve le sens policier. On se dit, il va falloir arrêter tout ça.
Dominique, certes, Xavier Philippe tapait dans la caisse. Ça fait quand même pas un mobile.
Ça fait pas un mobile, Frédéric, mais les policiers de la crime pensent quand même que le mobile, il se situe autour de l'argent. Et bien plus d'argent que quelques billets que Xavier Philippe irait piquer dans la caisse de la boulangerie. Pour les policiers de la crime, l'hypothèse, elle est celle-ci. La boulangerie, l'avion d'hélice, est à vendre. Un acheteur s'est manifesté et il achète la boulangerie pour 460 000 €. Les deux associés, Xavier Philippe et Christophe Bell, ont décidé, c'est un accord verbal, de faire moitié-moitié, 230 000 chacun. Mais au départ, il y en a un qui a porté 75%, Xavier Philippe, et l'autre 25%, Christophe Bell. Si Christophe Bell disparaît, Xavier Philippe n'est pas obligé de respecter cet engagement moitié-moitié. Il peut prendre les 25% de Christophe Bell. Donc, il gagne 115 000 €. Déjà, 115.
C'est une hypothèse.
C'est une hypothèse. On sait que, l'acheteur le dira plus tard, un dessous de table avait été prévu, de 100 000 €, qui devait être partagé aussi. Si je suis moi Xavier Philippe et que je veux garder la part de mon associé décédé, disparu, Christophe Bell, eh bien je gagne 50 000 € de plus. 50. Ensuite, Christophe Bell, il avait un compte, une assurance personnelle de 41 000 €. Et puis il avait aussi une assurance professionnelle de 60 000 € qui était doublée en cas de mort accidentelle ou de mort violente. Et qui est le bénéficiaire? C'est Xavier Philippe. 41 000 plus 120 000. D'accord? Ensuite, ils ont un compte associé sur lequel il y a 120 000 €. Et les policiers de la crime pensent que Xavier Philippe, il n'allait pas donner à la veuve de Christophe Bell les 60 000 €, la moitié du compte associé, qu'il allait les garder pour lui. Donc ça fait 62 plus. Et au total, ça fait 386 000 €, Frédéric. Pour les policiers de la crime, le mobile, il est là.
Maître Frédéric Beaulieu, vous êtes l'avocate de Xavier Philippe. Les policiers pensent avoir trouvé le mobile du crime, l'argent. Qu'est-ce qu'il en dit, votre client?
D'abord, ce qu'ont raconté les policiers sur le plan financier est faux. Et faux pas uniquement parce que je le dis, mais parce que la chambre financière spécialisée en la matière du tribunal correctionnel de Paris l'a dit. Et on est arrivé...
Par exemple, est-ce que vous pouvez nous les
détailler? Je vais vous donner des choses très précises. Par exemple, les policiers disaient, oui, nous avons rapporté la preuve que Xavier Philippe détournait à son profit parfois jusqu'à 150 000 € par an chaque année dans la boulangerie. Le tribunal a dit pas du tout. Il y a eu des détournements pour 45 000 € à peu près en moyenne par an. Ces 45 000 € étaient partagés entre Xavier Philippe et Christophe Bell qui faisaient du noir. Donc si vous voulez, il y a eu une enquête sur tout cet aspect financier qui d'abord a été fait de manière totalement partiale et partielle, dans l'unique but de faire la démonstration qui était l'a priori des policiers, qui était que tout ce qui était financier devait rapporter à Philippe et uniquement à lui, ce qui était erroné.
Dans le cadre de la vente de la boulangerie, les policiers imaginent, par exemple, que le dessous de table ne sera pas versé à la compagne de Christophe Bell, etc., etc. C'est-à-dire
Tout à fait, mais alors, là encore, c'est très intéressant, c'est que les gens sont venus témoigner, je répète, celui qui devait acheter la boulangerie d'une part, Sandrine, la compagne de Christophe Bell, que Xavier Philippe s'était engagé, et devant Christophe Bell, à ce que tout ce qui était dessous de table soit partagé entre les deux. Donc tout ça est tout simplement inexact.
Les policiers ont quand même noté que Xavier Philippe avait un compte associé bien plus fourni que celui de Christophe Bell.
Absolument. Xavier Philippe avait apporté de l'argent dès le départ alors que Christophe Bell n'en avait pas apporté. Ça, c'est la première chose. La deuxième chose, c'est qu'il y avait eu un accord entre eux. Christophe Bell, à cette époque, avait des problèmes assez sérieux avec la mère de son premier enfant, qui avait lancé contre lui un certain nombre de procédures pour récupérer des pensions alimentaires impayées, etc. Et il ne voulait pas qu'apparaissent sur son compte courant des sommes qui auraient pu être saisies. Et il y avait donc eu un accord entre les deux associés. C'est tout.
Mais il y avait bien une assurance décès au profit de Xavier Philippe.
Il y avait des assurances croisées entre les deux associés, qui faisaient que si l'un décédait, les assurances devaient rembourser les emprunts qui étaient encore en cours. Manifestement, il y a eu une erreur puisque ces assurances ont été signées en même temps que d'autres. Il y a eu une erreur de la part de Christophe Bell. Et dès que cela a été découvert, Xavier Philippe est allé voir Sandrine pour le lui dire, spontanément, et pour lui dire qu'il n'y aurait pas de difficulté et que ce serait bien évidemment elle qui toucherait ces sommes. Ce qu'elle a également indiqué au service de police quand elle a été entendue la première fois.
Donc selon vous, Xavier Philippe n'avait aucun intérêt financier à la mort de Christophe Bell.
Christophe Bell avait réussi à trouver un acheteur extrêmement intéressant qui leur achetait cette boulangerie pour un prix important, plus important que celui du marché. Et il était évident que le décès de Christophe Bell dans de telles conditions, c'est d'ailleurs ce qui s'est passé, entraînerait la rupture de ces pourparlers, parce que vous pensez bien que dans ce contexte-là, la vente de la boulangerie, elle a été totalement bloquée, et de ce fait, cette vente ne s'est pas faite. C'était bien plus dommageable pour Xavier Philippe que n'importe quoi d'autre.
Et Xavier Philippe, lui aussi, voulait vendre la boulangerie.
C'était leur projet commun de vendre.
Xavier Philippe a beau s'en défendre, Les policiers sont convaincus que le pâtissier a été tué pour des raisons financières et que son associé n'est pas pour rien. Le message téléphonique laissé en pleine nuit, les détournements d'argent, l'assurance décès, un faisceau de présomptions qui pèse lourd. Mais il manque encore une preuve. Les policiers veulent en savoir plus sur leur suspect numéro 1. Car au premier abord, c'est un homme bien sous tout rapport, un type sympathique même, qui nie farouchement son implication dans la disparition de son ami.
Effectivement, charmant au départ, Xavier Philippe, entendu à de nombreuses reprises, il y met beaucoup de bonne grâce, il apporte des détails, il a un visage toujours très positif, mais l'audition de ses proches, l'audition des anciennes personnes avec qui il a pu travailler, nous fait découvrir un personnage complètement différent. Toutes les déclarations nous font ouvrir le livre un petit peu de la vie de Xavier Philippe, et on va découvrir un personnage dont la vie est égrenée de soucis.
Xavier Philippe a déjà fait pas moins de 6 allers-retours en prison pour des faits de vol, port d'armes illégales, falsification de chèques, coups et blessures volontaires.
Je suis très étonné de la diversité et de l'importance des affaires dans lesquelles son nom apparaît. Et certaines laissent supposer que nous avons affaire, que nous pouvons avoir affaire à quelqu'un de retors, d'intelligent, de machiavélique.
Les policiers de la crime remontent le temps jusqu'à la jeunesse orléanaise de Xavier Philippe. Né en 1956, il a grandi à Orléans dans un milieu plutôt bourgeois, aux côtés de son frère jumeau Bertrand. Une enfance classique, mais dans l'ombre d'un frère un peu trop lumineux.
On a Bertrand qui est rond de caractère, aimable, courtois, qui a beaucoup d'entre-gens et qui est plutôt beau mec. Et puis on a un personnage plus sec et assez ombrageux. C'est deux personnages assez différents.
Bertrand avait vraiment cette gueule, cette gueule d'ange de poupon avec vraiment un regard bleu, toujours le grand sourire, et quand on le voyait, on lui serrait la main, il se passait quelque chose.
Au début des années 80, le jumeau de Xavier Philippe, Bertrand, crée une boîte de nuit à Orléans, le Quiproquo.
C'est une boîte grande, avant-gardiste. Puis à Orléans, c'était un événement, quoi. C'est-à-dire que la grande nouveauté est le lieu de place to be, le lieu où tout le monde voulait aller.
Bertrand Philippe, il fait partie de ceux qui véritablement ont impulsé le renouveau de la ville d'Orléans.
Xavier lui enchaîne les petits boulots. Carrossier, prof d'arts martiaux, vendeur, il galère. À Orléans, tout le monde connaît Bertrand, mais personne ne sait qui c'est Xavier Philippe.
J'avais déjà entendu parler de Xavier Philippe parce qu'il était le frère de quelqu'un que je connaissais. Mais là où véritablement j'ai été amené à m'y intéresser professionnellement, c'est quand il a mis le feu à la boîte de son frère.
Le 22 août 82, en pleine nuit, le quiproquo brûle. À l'époque, Alain Bilcard était commissaire à la crime d'Orléans.
Ils ont trouvé sur les lieux de l'incendie des gants et des chaussures à moitié calcinées. Et donc ils en ont déduit tout de suite que l'auteur de l'incendie s'était brûlé. Et donc on a fait les hôpitaux de la région qui traitent des grands brûlés. C'est à Tours qu'on a retrouvé la trace de Xavier Philippe, à savoir le frère du propriétaire de l'établissement. Et qui était gravement brûlé, oui, à 45%, je crois, donc, et qui a conservé les stigmates sur son visage de cette aventure.
L'assurance de la boîte de nuit est au nom de la famille Philippe. Le soupçon d'escroquerie à l'assurance plane. Xavier Philippe a 26 ans et il est condamné à 4 ans de prison pour incendie volontaire. À sa sortie, il lance une boîte de nuit comme son frère, la Péniche, un bateau amarré sur les quais de la Loire à Orléans. Mais le 22 août 86, la Péniche brûle à son tour.
Évidemment, tous les gens qui avaient mauvais esprit se sont dit, tiens, ça recommence, parce que 86-82, c'est pas si loin, la mémoire fonctionne encore. Il s'est avéré que quelqu'un que Xavier Philippe avait rencontré lors d'un de ses séjours en prison était responsable de l'incendie de la péniche. Donc, ça a fait porter un certain nombre de soupçons sur Xavier Philippe, évidemment, en tant que commanditaire.
S'agissant de la propriété de sa mère, il y avait une grosse assurance à la clé. J'avais donc supposé qu'il s'agissait d'une tentative d'escroquerie à l'assurance. À l'issue de l'enquête, il est certain que j'avais la conviction que Xavier Philippe avait commandité cette affaire.
Encore un incendie, encore un soupçon d'escroquerie. Mais au procès de 88, Xavier Philippe est relaxé et définitivement blanchi.
Il s'avérait qu'en réalité, c'est pas lui qui touchait l'assurance. Ce qui fait que sur le plan du mobile, il manquait déjà le mobile. Donc on voit bien par là qu'on avait tendance à lui en prêter plus qu'il n'en faisait.
Une mauvaise réputation, mais aussi quelques faits d'armes impressionnants. Le passé de Xavier Philippe n'incite pas les policiers du 36 à le croire sur parole. Benoît Hurel, à l'époque, vous êtes substitut du procureur à Créteil. Quand vous découvrez la jeunesse orléanaise de Xavier Philippe, j'imagine que ça conforte un peu vos doutes.
Nous apprenons rapidement que Xavier Philippe a été mis en cause dans une vingtaine d'affaires entre 1980 et 2005. Mais,
une vingtaine d'affaires.
Une vingtaine d'affaires. Affaires pour lesquelles il a bénéficié parfois de la réhabilitation judiciaire, ce qui interdit d'évoquer les condamnations. Affaires pour d'autres où il a été soit relaxé, soit n'a pas été poursuivi devant un tribunal.
Et ça va de quoi à quoi, ces vingtaines de dossiers? Ça concerne quels faits?
Les affaires pour lesquelles il est mis en cause, ça va de petits vols jusqu'à la torture d'un marchand d'armes.
Et cette histoire de torture?
En 1995, il y a un marchand, un armurier de la région de Créteil qui est tiré de son sommeil par 3 individus, qui est violenté, qui est torturé pendant toute une nuit et qui se fait dérober des dizaines d'armes. Quelques mois plus tard, une personne vient faire réparer une arme chez cet armurier et l'armurier se rend compte que cette arme lui a été volée la nuit des faits. La personne est entendue et on remonte jusqu'à Xavier Philippe qui a vendu cette arme quelques semaines après que l'armurier se fut fait dérober ses armes.
Mais l'armurier, j'imagine, ne l'a pas reconnu parmi ces 3 agresseurs.
Et l'armurier n'a pas du tout reconnu Xavier Philippe parmi ces 3 agresseurs. Et Xavier Philippe n'a pas du tout été condamné pour l'agression de cet armurier. Sauf que l'armurier se souvient que Xavier Philippe est passé dans son magasin quelques jours avant son agression et s'est renseigné sur les armes qu'il vendait et lui a même demandé de lui faire visiter la réserve d'armes où seront volées quelques jours plus tard toutes ces armes.
Et qu'est-ce que vous découvrez d'autre?
Le juge d'instruction ne tarde pas à découvrir que Xavier Philippe pourrait être impliqué dans une autre tentative d'assassinat commise en avril 1998.
Le dossier d'instruction de cette tentative d'assassinat dort donc toujours sur le bureau d'un juge parisien quand la brigade criminelle décide de s'y intéresser. Retour en 1998. Mardi 28 avril, la fête bat son plein au Banana Café dans le quartier des Halles. Le club gay est dirigé par 2 jeunes patrons, Tony Gomez et Grégory. Vers 23h30, les 2 amis rentrent chez eux à quelques pas de là dans leur duplex de la rue des Lombards. Mais exceptionnellement, Tony ne reste pas. Il repart animer la soirée du Banana.
Tony Gomez aura cette chance-là inouïe de passer très peu de temps dans l'appartement et contrairement à l'habitude, va entrer et sortir.
Resté seul, Grégory entend du bruit à l'étage. Là-haut, l'électricité ne fonctionne plus. Il monte une bougie à la main. Et là, dans le salon, un homme cagoulé le vise avec une carabine. Grégory prend la fuite, l'homme lui court après et lui tire dessus.
Grégory a le temps de dévaler les escaliers, il se prendra une balle dans le bras. Il aura le temps de fermer la porte derrière lui, heureusement.
Blessé, pieds nus, en pyjama, le jeune homme court jusqu'à l'entrée du Banana Café. Il est transporté immédiatement à l'hôpital, tandis que le personnel du club se précipite en bas de l'immeuble pour bloquer la porte d'entrée et empêcher le tireur de s'enfuir. Soudain, la patronne du bar voisin vient les prévenir. Un type bizarre s'est réfugié chez elle en passant par la sortie de secours. Il s'est attablé l'air de rien avec un immense sac de sport. La police arrive rapidement sur les lieux et interpelle le suspect. À ses pieds, il a fait tomber une cagoule noire. Dans le sac, les policiers trouvent un fusil, des médicaments et un étrange flacon de liquide vert. Interrogé, le tireur reste vague. Il explique seulement qu'il a agi sur ordre. Mais il refuse de donner le nom de son commanditaire. Le 1er mai 1998, l'homme est mis en examen pour complicité de tentative d'assassinat. Reste à trouver le commanditaire. Tony Gomez, le patron du Banana, est interrogé à son tour. Il croit savoir qui se cache derrière le tireur. Le directeur financier du Banana, un certain Xavier Philippe. À l'époque, l'homme a bien été entendu par la police. Mais 7 ans plus tard, l'enquête est au point mort et le dossier croupit sur le bureau d'un juge d'instruction. Pour les policiers qui travaillent sur l'affaire Bell, cette nouvelle histoire tombe à pic. Elle apporte de l'eau à leur moulin, eux qui n'ont toujours pas de preuves contre Xavier Philippe. Ils relancent la procédure Banana Café.
Les éléments qu'on va glaner dans ce dossier-là éclairent le personnage de Xavier Philippe. Tout ce qui le touche est intéressant pour notre dossier, la compréhension de notre dossier Christophe Bell.
La brigade criminelle convoque donc le témoin principal de cette affaire, Tony Gomez. Entre-temps, il est devenu le roi des nuits parisiennes, gérant de l'Étoile, un autre club branché. Costume chic, à l'aise en toutes circonstances, Tony Gomez mène une vie de businessman, ami des stars. Mais dans le bureau du quai des Orfèvres, à l'évocation du nom de Xavier Philippe, Tony Gomez n'en mène pas large.
Il a une image d'horreur, il en ressort terrorisé, juste à l'idée d'évoquer ce nom-là. Il est décomposé, il n'en dort plus. Cette tentative d'assassinat résonne encore en lui.
Et là, spontanément, il s'est ouvert et on avait l'impression que nous allions le sauver, lui apporter une aide considérable vis-à-vis de ce poids qui pesait sur ses épaules depuis tant d'années.
Tony Gomez raconte son histoire. Il a vécu pendant plus de 20 ans avec Bertrand, le lumineux jumeau de Xavier Philippe. Ensemble, ils ont monté le Banana Café au début des années 90. Le club a rencontré presque aussitôt le succès et est devenu la boîte à la mode, la boîte des stars.
Pierre Palma, Bigard, et Laurent Baffy, c'était vraiment ceux qui étaient là en permanence, quoi. C'était vraiment la boîte du moment, quoi. Il y avait piano bar en dessous qui chantait, tout le monde venait. C'est vraiment une ambiance d'enfer. Tony, c'est lui le number one, comment dire.
Alors quand Xavier Philippe, désœuvré, a cherché du travail, son frère Bertrand lui a proposé un poste de directeur financier au Banana Café.
Xavier, il était plutôt un peu en retrait, hein. Lui, il s'occupait des finances. Il n'aimait pas trop les photos, hein. C'est pas la personne qui se mettait toujours en avant les photos, il voulait pas trop, hein. C'était un peu retiré.
Mais en 95, Bertrand se suicide. Sans lui, les relations entre Tony Gomez et le jumeau survivant se dégradent.
Il y avait de forts soupçons sur Xavier Philippe. Il le soupçonnait de ponctionner dans la caisse et également d'être à l'origine des assurances vie, de fausses assurances vie qu'il avait contractées à son bénéfice.
Tony Gomez raconte d'ailleurs qu'il voulait licencier Xavier Philippe quelques semaines avant la fusillade de la rue des Lombards.
Xavier Philippe n'a pas su négocier le virage entre une association qui devait finir parce que les logiques n'étaient plus partagées et a préféré utiliser des moyens beaucoup plus radicaux pour arriver à se sortir d'une situation qui était bloquée. C'était ça ou partir.
Tony Gomez est persuadé que la tentative d'assassinat de 98 a été manigancée par Xavier Philippe et qu'elle le visait, lui, pour mettre la main sur le Banana Café.
Dans les auditions de Tony Gomez, clairement, des mots assez tranchants ont été utilisés. Hein. Quelqu'un de jaloux, d'ambitieux, de vicieux, que la violence n'arrête pas, des propos assez durs, assez réalistes.
Un ressentiment qui impressionne les policiers. L'affaire Bell et l'affaire Gomez ont décidément beaucoup de points communs.
Les contrats d'assurance, une logique qui revient, hein, comme un leitmotiv. On retrouve ces signatures imitées, on retrouvera des contrats au bénéfice de Xavier Philippe et de sa famille. On retrouvera des logiques qui sont identiques et en copier-coller avec l'affaire Bell.
Lors de la perquisition dans l'appartement de la rue des Lombards en avril 98, les policiers avaient retrouvé sur le sol des médicaments et un liquide vert. En fait, des anxiolytiques et de l'arsenic. De quoi préparer un puissant somnifère. Dans la salle de bain, la baignoire était pleine.
Un scénario qui se dessine petit à petit avec, pourquoi pas, une dispute entre deux amis. Le premier fait feu sur le second et puis veut se suicider après, pris de remords d'avoir tué quelqu'un. Et puis va dans son bain avec le poison à l'intérieur.
Les policiers pensent que quelqu'un voulait faire croire à un crime passionnel entre Tony Gomez et son ami. Tony aurait pu tuer Grégory avant de se suicider dans sa baignoire.
Un peu tiré par les cheveux, et c'est à l'image de beaucoup de choses qu'on a vues. Et rappelez-vous le début de notre enquête Belle, on est dans un bois où clairement tout est un petit peu prévu pour qu'on ait un beau spectacle.
Dominique, pourquoi les enquêteurs pensent que Xavier Philippe est le commanditaire dans l'affaire du Banana Café? Sur les seules accusations de Tony Gomez?
Ben non, Frédéric, parce que des accusations, une dénonciation, ça ne suffit pas à construire une enquête, évidemment. Et puis là, ils ont quand même affaire à la brigade criminelle, c'est pas les policiers du coin de la rue. Donc, c'est vrai qu'au moment de la confrontation, dans le cabinet du juge, Xavier Philippe et le tireur de la rue des Lombards vont dire « on ne s'est jamais rencontrés, on ne se connaît absolument pas ». Mais les flics vont vérifier, évidemment. Ils vont d'abord découvrir que tous les deux sont originaires de la même ville, Orléans.
Coïncidence?
C'est quand même étonnant. Regardez, ça ce sont les écrous, les écrous des deux. Ici, à gauche, les dates d'écrous de Xavier Philippe et à droite, les dates d'écrous du fameux tireur de la rue des Lombards. En mai 1982, au printemps 82, ils ont tous les deux fait de la prison à la maison d'arrêt d'Orléans. Et leur période de prison se recoupe à un moment. Ils font un peu plus de 15 jours de prison au même endroit, dans cette maison d'arrêt d'Orléans.
Mais 15 jours, c'est quand même pas énorme.
La maison d'arrêt d'Orléans, c'est une petite prison. Et dans une petite prison, deux garçons de la même ville vont forcément se rencontrer. C'est ce que pensent les policiers. Forcément se parler, forcément se connaître, échanger. Et les policiers vont trouver autre chose. Ils vont découvrir, en faisant les fanettes, les factures détaillées du téléphone portable du tireur, qu'il a téléphoné 6 fois en 3 jours à Xavier Philippe sur son lieu de travail, sur son téléphone professionnel. Il lui a téléphoné le 4, le 16 et le 18 avril 1998. Et le 18 avril 1998, ça, c'est 10 jours avant la tentative de meurtre sur Grégory, l'ami de Tony Gomez. Donc, pour les policiers, c'est absolument clair, ces deux-là mentent, ils se connaissent.
Maître Beaulieu, les policiers trouvent une ressemblance entre l'affaire du Banana Café et l'affaire Christophe Bell. Un mobile financier, une mise en scène du crime. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Je pense que les policiers sont partis de la fin pour arriver au début. C'est-à-dire les policiers sont partis de l'affirmation selon laquelle Xavier Philippe était coupable et qu'après ils ont reconstruit en puisant dans son passé un certain nombre de choses et d'événements pour les faire coller les uns avec les autres et pour faire penser qu'il y avait des similitudes.
Et donc, quel aurait été l'intérêt de votre client de se débarrasser de Tony Gomez?
Ah bah alors ça, aucun. C'était même catastrophique pour lui, la disparition de Tony Gomez. La disparition de Tony Gomez était catastrophique, puisque Xavier Philippe travaillait dans une société qui s'appelle qui était le Banana Café. Il n'avait aucune participation dans le capital de cette société. Donc il n'avait rien à en tirer si elle était vendue, premièrement. Deuxièmement, la disparition de Tony Gomez, c'était la disparition du Banana Café, dont il était l'âme et l'animateur. Troisièmement, c'est Tony Gomez, sur son nom personnel, qui avait l'autorisation de nuit qui permettait au Banana Café de fonctionner. Ça veut donc dire que la disparition de Tony Gomez entraînait la disparition du Banana Café, entraînait la disparition de toutes ses activités et faisait que Xavier Philippe n'avait plus de travail et plus de revenus. Et enfin, étant propriétaire des murs, il perdait son locataire.
Alors pourquoi Xavier Philippe se retrouve soupçonné?
Il faut d'abord se souvenir que les faits dont vous me parlez se sont déroulés en avril 1998 et que Xavier Philippe n'a été mis en examen, c'est-à-dire qu'on lui a reproché quelque chose dans cette affaire, qu'à partir du mois de mai 2006, c'est-à-dire 8 ans après. Pourquoi? Parce que les services de police avaient exhumé cette affaire, l'avaient interprétée et racontée à leur manière dans le dossier de Christophe Bell, et que c'est à partir de ce moment-là qu'on s'est tourné vers M. Philippe, alors qu'aucun juge d'instruction, pendant ces 8 années-là, n'avait imaginé de le mettre en examen.
L'affaire du Banana Café donne un coup de pouce décisif à l'affaire Bell. Les enquêteurs signent un procès-verbal de rapprochement entre les deux dossiers le 28 novembre 2005.
C'est simple, c'est la veille de l'arrestation de Xavier Philippe. On le sait, c'est pas un secret, c'est ce procès verbal qui convainc le juge d'instruction de Créteil de faire arrêter Xavier Philippe.
Le 29 novembre 2005 au petit matin, Xavier Philippe est donc interpellé chez lui et placé en garde à vue au quai des Orfèvres pour l'assassinat du pâtissier. Il ne paraît pas inquiet.
Une assez grande sérénité du côté de Xavier Philippe, qui est convaincu qu'il va sortir à la fin de la garde à vue et qu'il va s'expliquer, qu'il n'a rien à se reprocher, que tout ira bien. On était moins serein que nos clients à la vue de l'attitude des policiers. On a un peu l'habitude et on sait que des policiers de cette expérience, on est quand même à la brigade criminelle de Paris, qui sont comme ça attendus comme des arcs. C'est pas le signe de policiers qui vont lâcher l'affaire, comme on dit, ou qui vont s'arrêter en si bon chemin. Ils veulent un résultat, c'est clair.
Dans le bureau de garde à vue, le chef d'enquête met la pression. Mais Xavier Philippe ne se laisse pas démonter.
Cette garde à vue se passe très bien. C'est un homme extrêmement courtois qui répond à nos questions, mais en restant constamment dans le déni. Il va jamais reconnaître, évidemment, son implication dans l'assassinat de Christophe Bell, mais pas davantage son implication dans les malversations.
Xavier Philippe finit pourtant par lâcher un détail qui n'échappe pas aux policiers.
On va utiliser à la fin de l'instruction, ce que moi j'ai l'habitude d'appeler un indice à la Colombo. Vous savez, quand le suspect dit quelque chose à l'enquêteur et l'enquêteur lui répond « Mais monsieur, comment avez-vous su cet élément si ce n'est vous le coupable ?»
Il parlera de Christophe Bell tué par 3 balles. Or, grosse surprise, au départ de l'enquête, tous les messages, la presse se font l'écho d'un homme tué par 2 balles dans la tête. Cette 3e balle, il la connaît d'où, elle sort d'où? En tout cas, pas de nous, pas de la famille non plus, puisque personne n'est avisé de ça, et puis surtout pas la famille, avec des détails aussi sordides, vous imaginez bien qu'on va les garder pour nous. Et puis c'est des petits détails comme ça qui sont... On a la chance d'avoir un petit off, si vous voulez, on garde un petit secret en main, et puis là, ça ressort.
C'est vraiment de la forfaiture, parce que 15 jours après le meurtre, les proches de Christophe Bell se constituent partie civile, ont donc accès à la procédure par leurs avocats, et on sait qu'il y a de très nombreux contacts entre Xavier Philippe et Nathalie Bell, donc on ne peut pas dire qu'il n'est pas possible que ces parties civiles n'aient pas, à un moment quelconque, dit à Xavier Philippe, il y a eu 3 coups de feu, et d'ailleurs c'est ce qu'il a toujours dit.
La police a également appris que Xavier Philippe est collectionneur d'armes. Or, le pâtissier a probablement été tué avec une arme de collection, un revolver 6,35. Les enquêteurs perquisitionnent au domicile de Xavier Philippe et tombent sur un arsenal.
Des armes à cette occasion seront découvertes, de nombreuses armes, des fusils de collection, également un 6,35, une autre arme de poing, un vélo dog. C'est une petite arme que les cyclistes mettaient dans leurs chaussettes. Des expertises vont être effectuées. Alors le 6,35 aurait pu correspondre, mais ce n'est pas le cas. C'est une arme qui ne correspond en rien à celle qui a pu tirer les balles qui ont tué Christophe Bell.
Toujours pas l'arme du crime, toujours pas de preuves matérielles. Mais pour les policiers, le dossier est tout de même assez lourd. Le coup de téléphone, les malversations à la boulangerie et le passé chargé de Xavier Philippe suffisent aussi à convaincre le juge. Le 1er décembre 2005, 8 mois après la mort de Christophe Bell, Xavier Philippe est donc mis en examen pour assassinat et incarcéré à Fresnes. Dominique, les policiers veulent cerner un peu mieux le personnage et ils vont aller interroger son ex-femme Céline. En fait, elle va se montrer très bavarde, je crois.
Oui, Céline, elle va beaucoup parler aux policiers. Ils ont vécu ensemble pendant 8 ans. Ils ont eu une petite fille tous les deux. Donc elle est entendue le 7 décembre 2005. Ils ont vécu ensemble dans les années 80. Alors, elle raconte que quand ils ont vécu ensemble, Xavier Philippe a flirté de façon incessante avec la justice, qu'il a eu des ennuis, qu'il n'a pas cessé de faire des allers-retours en prison. Et c'était quelqu'un qui l'inquiétait, qui l'intriguait. Elle dit dans le procès-verbal d'audition, ici, cette partie que j'ai surlignée en jaune, elle dit aux policiers, il commençait vraiment à y avoir beaucoup de cadavres, ou plutôt beaucoup d'affaires d'homicide autour de lui. Et quand elle leur dit ça, elle leur lâche quelque chose. Elle leur dit, voilà, moi, je suis parti un soir, j'ai pris ma fille sous le bras, je suis parti avec mes affaires parce qu'il est rentré et voilà ce qu'il m'a dit. C'était le 17 novembre 1988. Il est arrivé en disant, j'ai buté un mec, j'ai tué Pascal Leroy. Ensuite, il m'a menacé de me tuer si je parlais, alors je n'ai rien dit. Qui est Pascal Leroy ? Pascal Leroy, à l'époque, Xavier Philippe, il a une boîte de transport, une société de transport. Et il travaille avec un garçon qui s'appelle Pascal Leroy. Donc il vient de dire à Céline, j'ai tué Pascal Leroy.
Et ce Pascal Leroy, il a en effet disparu ?
Évidemment, les policiers vont ressortir le dossier Pascal Leroy. Effectivement, c'est quelqu'un qui a disparu, dont on n'a plus jamais eu de nouvelles. C'est pour ça qu'elle est partie, Céline.
Et alors Xavier Philippe, il dit quoi, lui ?
Évidemment, Xavier Philippe, il nie avoir un quelconque rapport avec la disparition de Pascal Leroy. Mais les policiers de la crime vont quand même ressortir le dossier de Pascal Leroy.
La brigade criminelle n'en revient pas. Encore une affaire à épingler au tableau de Xavier Philippe, et pas des moindres. En 88, une information judiciaire pour homicide volontaire a bien été ouverte après la disparition de Pascal Leroy. Mais l'affaire a abouti à un non-lieu en 94. 17 ans après, il est trop tard pour trouver d'autres éléments. Les policiers ne peuvent plus résoudre cette disparition.
Fin de piste, si vous voulez, hein, fin d'enquête. On n'a pas trouvé le corps, on n'a pas eu non plus les moyens de le chercher du fait de la prescription. On en reste là, mais on a quand même finalement ce mort de plus dans le sillage de Xavier Philippe. Comment se fait-il qu'il soit à chaque fois mêlé à des affaires qui finissent très mal ? Ça commence à faire beaucoup de morts autour de lui.
L'homme qui porte malheur à ses associés. Le personnage colle désormais à la peau de Xavier Philippe. Et même prescrite, la disparition de Pascal Leroy l'enferme un peu plus dans le rôle de l'assassin.
Quand on va découvrir ces dénonciations dans le dossier, on a évidemment conscience que ça va faire un effet dévastateur. Hein, calomnier, il en reste toujours quelque chose, on connaît la chanson. Donc, il n'y a aucune preuve dans ce dossier. Il y a la parole de Céline qui raconte une scène, mais on sent bien que les policiers, les procureurs, les juges d'instruction sont convaincus qu'il est coupable.
L'instruction touche à son terme et la brigade criminelle pense désormais avoir affaire à un homme qui prémédite ses mauvais coups. Pour les policiers, Xavier Philippe a tendu un guet-apens à Christophe Bell.
Christophe Bell, il faut se souvenir que depuis quelques semaines, il est un petit peu embêté. Sa moto, elle est abîmée, on lui crève les pneus, il en a clairement assez.
Il y avait quand même une montée en puissance concernant les dégradations et l'anxiété de Christophe Bell, certainement entretenu par Xavier Philippe.
Il a réussi, je crois, à conditionner Christophe Bell en le persuadant qu'il était victime de la concurrence d'un autre pâtissier qui pouvait lui en vouloir. Il a réussi à l'en convaincre. Hein.
Écoute, viens, on va se venger un petit peu, je vais t'aider, t'inquiète pas, on va aller lui crever les pneus aussi, on va faire un truc, on va faire un coup pour qu'il arrête de t'embêter.
La nuit du 17 mai, les deux hommes se seraient donné rendez-vous en moto et Xavier Philippe l'aurait guidé jusqu'à Sucy-en-Brie.
Viens, je t'emmène, on va régler ça, et puis c'est pas loin, il y a un parking pour se garer, on ira. Puis après, la seule chose c'est que forcément ils prennent pas la bonne direction, ils vont pas dans le sens du pavillon, ils rentrent dans le bois, et puis le bois, bah, c'est là où trouve la mort Christophe Bell.
Pour nous, c'était un projet qui était préparé, élaboré, réfléchi, pensé, incontestablement.
Xavier Philippe est un garçon extrêmement intelligent qui a, encore une fois, essayé de commettre le crime parfait. Il a presque réussi.
Jusqu'au matin du 17 mai, lorsque Xavier Philippe rallume son téléphone portable.
Il va découvrir, je pense avec une certaine stupeur, qu'il y a un message de Christophe qui est enregistré sur son téléphone portable.
Je suis là dans 5-10 minutes, salut, c'est clairement le grain de sable.
Il sait que ce message sera retrouvé à tout le moins, que sur des listings, sur des fadettes, on retrouvera trace d'un appel dans la nuit de Christophe Bell à lui. Donc il ne l'efface pas et il va essayer d'expliquer l'inexplicable, à savoir que ce message en réalité est un accident, ne correspond à aucune réalité, ne lui était pas destiné. On a une désignation outre-tombe par celui qui est mort de celui qui l'a tué.
Maître Beaulieu, comment abordez-vous le procès pour le meurtre de Christophe Bell? Est-ce que vous pensez que vous allez pouvoir convaincre les jurés que Xavier Philippe est victime d'un harcèlement policier?
La thèse policière affirmée de la culpabilité de Christophe Bell a été mise en place dès le départ de l'instruction. Et que toute l'enquête policière, toute l'instruction a été faite sous l'aune de cette conviction policière. Et qu'à partir de cette conviction policière, on a aligné tous les éléments dans le même sens, on les a tous éclairés de la même manière pour qu'ils aboutissent à ce qui était considéré par les policiers comme une certitude, leur certitude, à savoir la culpabilité de Xavier Philippe. Et donc, l'enjeu de ce procès, c'est de déconstruire cette espèce de logique fausse et de démontrer que chacun des éléments ne pouvait pas être lu systématiquement dans le sens de la culpabilité.
Et ce coup de fil qu'il reçoit en pleine nuit, c'est quand même accablant.
Non, c'est pas accablant. Je voudrais quand même vous dire quelque chose de très simple. Ce coup de fil qu'il reçoit, s'il est coupable, qu'est-ce qu'il fait? Il l'efface, il sait qu'il y en aura la trace, et il dira aux enquêteurs, ben oui, il y avait un coup de fil, c'était un coup de fil blanc, il n'y avait pas de message, donc j'ai effacé, et puis voilà. Et on saura quoi? On saura que Christophe Bell a essayé de le joindre pendant la nuit, c'est tout. Donc on dira qu'effectivement, il a essayé de le joindre, peut-être parce que quelqu'un l'avait attrapé, peut-être parce qu'il était en danger, peut-être parce qu'il voulait lui parler, et c'est terminé, il n'y a plus d'affaire. Donc s'il est coupable, il l'aurait effacé.
Et que comptez-vous plaider alors?
Ah bah, évidemment l'acquittement. Évidemment l'acquittement.
Alors, Xavier Philippe, un tueur en série ou un fantasme policier? C'est aux jurés de trancher. Le procès de Xavier Philippe s'ouvre le 23 juin 2008 devant la cour d'assises de Créteil. Xavier Philippe, jugé pour l'assassinat du pâtissier Christophe Bell. Mais dans la presse, sa réputation le précède.
C'est vrai que lorsque le premier procès d'assises s'ouvre, La France entière connaît Xavier Philippe comme un serial killer d'associé. C'est quand même gonflé, et le mot est faible, parce qu'en ce qui concerne le roi, il n'a pas même été mis en garde à vue dans cette affaire, on n'a rien. En ce qui concerne Gomez, l'instruction est toujours en cours, il est certes mis en examen mais présumé innocent. En ce qui concerne Christophe Bell, il n'est pas encore jugé.
Les jurés et le public découvrent dans le box un petit homme calme et poli.
C'est l'image d'un petit comptable en gilet, sans grande envergure, qui vient très poliment, de manière presque obséquieuse, présenter des explications avec une vraie bienveillance à l'égard des gens. Il est un peu là par hasard, un peu là par accident. On a vraiment l'impression, dans la forme, qu'il est victime d'une erreur judiciaire.
Il y avait un décalage entre ce pourquoi on était là, donc au minimum un meurtre, peut-être un assassinat, et l'attitude de Xavier Philippe, qui était un petit peu comme un gentleman qui converserait dans un salon. La présidente et Xavier Philippe se sont mis à dialoguer énormément. Lui était dans une attitude extrêmement pleine de sollicitude, très poli, etc. Donc quand elle lui posait des questions, par exemple, il disait « Ah, je vous remercie d'avoir pensé à me poser cette question, Madame la Présidente ». Il lui faisait tout le temps des compliments.
Xavier Philippe nie toujours avec énergie. Et ses avocats font preuve de la même conviction pour défendre son innocence.
Ça, c'est quelque chose qui, moi, me convainc de manière absolument irréfragable. Il n'est pas sorti de chez lui cette nuit-là. On n'a pas un indice dans ce dossier que Xavier Philippe est sorti de chez lui. Vous n'avez pas une caméra qui l'a filmé, il n'y a pas un témoin qui l'a vu, et il n'y a pas une trace de lui sur place. Donc, il n'est pas sorti de chez lui cette nuit-là.
Pour appuyer sa démonstration, Maître Sarda, l'avocat de Xavier Philippe, s'est livré à une expérience. Il a filmé l'appartement de Xavier Philippe et il projette le film aux jurés.
Le couple dort sur une mezzanine en bois. Monsieur Philippe dort au fond, donc il doit contourner ou passer au-dessus de sa compagne s'il veut en sortir. Ensuite, il descend un petit escalier en bois qui grince beaucoup. Il doit encore affronter un petit chien adorable qui est toujours ravi de le voir et qui aboie dès que quelqu'un apparaît sur le palier. Il doit ouvrir une vieille porte blindée qui grince et qui frotte sur le sol, la refermer, et on ne peut la refermer qu'en tirant assez fort dessus. Idem au retour. Je vais vous dire, c'est impensable que cette femme ne se soit pas rendue compte que son compagnon sorte, c'est pas possible.
Mais l'alibi est vite écarté par l'accusation. Elle rappelle le message téléphonique de Christophe Bell, les trous dans la comptabilité de la boulangerie, et surtout, elle revient sur le passé de Xavier Philippe. La cour d'assises découvre peu à peu que le gentleman courtois assis dans le box a eu une vie bien agitée.
Chaque heure se rajoutait quelque chose, quoi. Quand on avait entendu l'histoire de l'immolation par le feu dans la boîte de nuit, quand on avait entendu toutes les escroqueries, les trafics, les prisons, la deuxième boîte de nuit qui crame après la première.
Il y a des moments où il parle et il s'étrangle un peu, il fait « Excusez-moi, Madame la Présidente, j'ai du mal parce que j'ai eu la trachée écrasée lors d'un accident d'avion. Mais qu'est-ce que c'est que cette histoire d'accident d'avion? Et on apprendra un peu plus tard qu'il a eu un accident avec sa femme alors qu'il était dans les Alpes.
Et puis tout d'un coup, incidemment presque, on dit « Ah oui, et puis tel jour, en 91, vous étiez à un feu rouge, en moto, vous avez démarré et vous avez tué le grand-père qui passait devant. » Cette vie est incroyable et semée d'événements extrêmement violents.
Je crois que ça a fonctionné comme un rouleau compresseur sur la conviction des jurés. Ça a fonctionné comme un millefeuille, en ajoutant tous les jours de l'audience des éléments nouveaux. Tiens, il a fait ça, tiens, il a fait ça, tiens, il a fait ça. Et alors que c'est objectivement pas des charges, ça devient inconsciemment une charge et ça finit par devenir terriblement accablant, convaincant. Et nous, à la défense, qu'est-ce que vous voulez qu'on fasse contre ça?
Le défilé des témoins enfonce encore un peu plus Xavier Philippe. Il y a d'abord Céline, son ex-femme. Même si l'affaire Leroy est prescrite, la cour d'assises a décidé d'évoquer la disparition de cet ancien associé.
On a vu arriver cette jeune femme très jolie avec Ses belles boucles blondes, son visage d'ange. Elle tremblait des pieds à la tête, elle tremblait comme une feuille. Et elle a été extrêmement... À la fois, elle parlait de manière très sobre, c'est-à-dire qu'elle parlait tout doucement. Et en même temps, les mots qu'elle disait étaient extrêmement durs. Elle a dit c'est un pervers, c'est un criminel, c'est un tordu. Pour elle, il l'a tué. Et ça ne fait pas de doute.
On ne saura jamais la vérité dans la disparition de Pascal Leroy, mais ce qui est sûr, c'est que l'évocation de cette affaire devant la cour d'assises fait très mauvais effet pour Xavier Philippe.
Autre témoin clé à la barre, Tony Gomez.
Tony Gomez arrive à la barre et je crois qu'une des premières choses qu'il dit, c'est tous ceux qui ont approché Xavier Philippe ont eu leur vie anéantie. Il a l'impression que Xavier Philippe, il le présente comme ça, est une sorte d'ange noir qui a pesé sur toute sa vie et qui a fait basculer sa vie vers le malheur.
Tony Gomez, son témoignage est assez empoisonné parce qu'il distille des informations qui sont pas judiciaires, mais qui ont un effet dévastateur pour Xavier Philippe.
Tony Gomez raconte que Xavier Philippe a eu une enfance où on lui autorisait tout. Il parle de son père en disant le principe d'éducation du père, c'est il est interdit d'interdire quoi que ce soit à mes enfants. Et il dit du coup, Xavier Philippe n'avait aucun interdit, aucune frontière, aucune limite. S'il veut quelque chose, il le prend. S'il veut tuer quelqu'un, il tue.
Tony Gomez n'est qu'un simple témoin. Pourtant, il est venu avec son avocat qui prend des notes.
On sent que la partition qui se joue à ce moment-là dans le procès, c'est pas l'affaire Christophe Bell, c'est une autre affaire, c'est l'affaire du Banana Café.
Sur leur banc, les avocats de Xavier Philippe sont excédés.
Ils n'ont pas grand-chose finalement. Donc il faut non pas broder, je serais méchant de dire ça, mais il faut aller chercher de façon de plus en plus large les éléments. Donc on va remonter dans son enfance, on va écouter des gens qui vous racontent qu'il a tué des gens il y a 25 ans, qui n'avaient pas eu l'idée de le dire plus tôt, et on va les croire, etc. etc. Et c'est vrai qu'à la cour d'assises, l'assassinat stricto sensu de Christophe Bell était finalement minoritaire dans les débats.
Benoît Hurel, à ce procès, la défense va beaucoup accuser les policiers de s'être servi du passé de Xavier Philippe pour gonfler l'affaire. Qu'est-ce que vous en dites?
La brigade criminelle qui a travaillé sur ce dossier avec beaucoup de sérieux et de méticulosité a examiné chronologiquement plusieurs pistes avant de tomber sur Xavier Philippe. Et ces pistes ont, une à une, été écartées, et aussi d'ailleurs par la cour d'assises, parce que ces pistes ont été rediscutées devant la cour d'assises.
À votre avis, quels sont les moments clés qui ont emporté en fait la conviction du jury?
Le premier point qui apparaît clairement dans le procès de Créteil, c'est que la boulangerie de Xavier Philippe et de Christophe Bell, qui a subi des dégradations un mois et demi avant les faits, a très vraisemblablement été dégradée par Xavier Philippe lui-même. Ces dégradations ont eu lieu pendant des vacances où Xavier Philippe n'avait cessé de dire qu'il était parti en province. Et l'examen attentif des relevés téléphoniques a démontré qu'entre cette période de 15 jours de vacances, il était revenu à Paris et avait passé un coup de téléphone le dimanche matin de la boulangerie l'Avion d'Hélice.
Mais dans quel but il aurait dégradé son propre bien?
Eh bien, l'intérêt, c'est d'exciter la colère de Christophe Bell pour l'inciter à aller se venger de cet autre boulanger avec lequel il est en conflit et le faire venir sur les lieux du crime, à savoir Sucy-en-Brie, puisque c'est à proximité immédiate des lieux du crime qu'habitait cet autre boulanger.
Et vous vous souvenez d'autres moments clés?
Je me souviens d'un moment où Xavier Philippe ne cessait de dire depuis 3 jours que l'appel téléphonique qui de la nuit des faits ne pouvait pas lui être destiné, parce que quand Christophe Bell lui téléphonait, et quand il téléphonait à Christophe Bell, il ne se disait jamais « salut » comme dans le message téléphonique, mais toujours « je te fais un bisou, je t'embrasse, bisous ». Et la présidente a fait écouter les messages téléphoniques envoyés le jour des faits par Xavier Philippe à Christophe Bell pour s'inquiéter du fait qu'il n'était pas à la boulangerie. Et les messages se terminaient invariablement par « salut ». Alors j'ai interrogé Xavier Philippe pour savoir pourquoi il nous avait dit exactement le contraire depuis plusieurs jours, et il a été absolument incapable de me répondre.
Quelle peine demandez-vous lors de votre réquisitoire?
Nous demandons une peine de 30 années de réclusion criminelle parce que nous considérons que le caractère extrêmement froid, extrêmement rationnel des faits, ainsi que l'abus de confiance radical dont a été victime Christophe Bell pendant les derniers mois de son existence, justifiait le prononcé d'une des peines les plus importantes prévues par le Code pénal.
Pour vous, cet assassinat a été prémédité, préparé de longue date?
Je vous rappelle que l'assurance vie de Christophe Bell, qui aurait dû être souscrite au bénéfice de sa femme et qui, en réalité, l'a été au bénéfice de Xavier Philippe contre la volonté exprimée par Christophe Bell, l'a été près de 18 mois avant l'assassinat.
Ce 5 juillet 2008, après 15 jours de procès, les enquêteurs, les avocats, les familles attendent avec appréhension la décision du jury. Devant le palais de justice de Créteil, Nathalie, la sœur de Christophe Bell, passe un dernier coup de fil.
Il y a eu les réquisitoires, le procureur extraordinaire, je t'expliquerai. Il a requis 30 ans avec une peine de sûreté de 20 ans. Et puis on va attendre le verdict, quoi, mais ça peut être dans 2-3 heures. Hein. C'est pas... J'en peux plus d'attendre.
Il est 1h du matin et le verdict vient de tomber. Dans le box, Xavier Philippe s'est évanoui. Les familles, elles, sortent bouleversées.
Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? 30 ans. Oh, il a pris 30 ans, c'est incroyable. Okay. Vraiment, je suis vraiment contente. Je suis soulagée que ce mec-là, il reste enfermé, vraiment, je suis...
30 ans pour un assassinat et pour une vie décidément très mouvementée. Qu'attendiez-vous de Xavier Philippe pendant ce procès? Qu'il dise la vérité?
Non. Ah non, j'étais persuadée. C'est un homme qui a un passé quand même sulfureux. Il a été plusieurs fois incarcéré. Enfin, non, je savais qu'il lâcherait pas. J'ai prié pour être entendu. J'ai prié pour que le verdict soit à la hauteur de toute cette procédure, de tout ce combat qu'on avait mené. Mais j'attendais rien de lui, aucune vérité. Je veux dire qu'un verdict, ça change rien dans la douleur. C'est-à-dire que je pensais pas que ça puisse atténuer ma douleur. Mais je savais que pendant la période où il serait incarcéré, il renouvellerait pas ses faits et je serais un peu tranquille.
Xavier Philippe a fait appel, mais en 2010, la justice a confirmé sa condamnation. Sans se décourager, il s'est pourvu en cassation, demande rejetée, là encore. Le tueur d'associés ne peut plus échapper désormais à ses 30 ans de réclusion criminelle.
Human beings are strange creatures. They seek meaning in the shadows, hoping to build a sanctuary away from the noise of the world, only to find that the darkness they were fleeing has followed them right to the doorstep. They make decisions that defy logic, driven by desperation, chemical imbalances, or the crushing weight of their own history. I have seen many cases, but the story of the Jameson family remains one that sticks to your ribs. It is a puzzle where the pieces do not just fail to fit. They seem to have been crafted for an entirely different game. My, you have to be kidding me. A family drives up to a mountain in a remote corner of Oklahoma, intent on a fresh start. Leaving their life behind in a pickup truck, that acts more like a tomb than a vehicle. When the authorities finally find that truck, the keys are still in ignition, but the doors are locked. A dog is inside, barely clinging to life, starving and abandoned. There is money under the seat, $32,000 in cash, and IDs left behind as if they were nothing more than discarded trash. And then there's that letter. A 7-page manifesto from a wife to a husband, filled with talk of demons, satanic Bibles, and attempted murder. It is a portrait of a marriage rotting from the inside out, a volatile cocktail of untreated mental illness, addiction, and fear. I tell you, when you look at the evidence, you are forced to look at the people. Sherilyn Jameson, a woman grappling with bipolar disorder and depression, losing the custody of a child, spiraling into a world where she painted warnings about black cats and witches on a shipping container. Bobby Jameson, a man who saw his father as a mafia threat and sought out special bullets to kill spirits. Were they truly in the throes of a supernatural delusion, or were they simply two broken people drowning in a sea of their own making? The surveillance footage from that morning is the ultimate tease. They move back and forth to that truck for 30 minutes, aimless, spectral, haunting. The public calls it a trance. I call it the behavior of people who have already detached from reality long before they ever reach the dirt roads of Panola Mountain. But here is where the logic fails. You have a family that supposedly spirals into a murder-suicide plot, yet they leave behind the very tools of that destruction: the money, the phone, the keys. If you are going to end your life and the life of your child, you do not go for a casual walk and just vanish into the ether. You do not leave your dog to die a slow, agonizing death in a hot truck. That is not the work of a mother. That is the work of a monster, or the work of someone who was never given a chance to choose. When their remains were discovered 4 years later, just 2.5 miles from that truck, the puzzle grew more grotesque. The terrain is brutal. It is not a place where a man with a chronic back injury and a 6-year-old child simply wander off to die. The physics do not work. It is an impossible hike for them under those conditions. This shifts the needle from misadventure to something colder, something calculated. This is not a suicide. This is a crime scene that the wilderness has spent 4 years trying to digest. Then you have the characters in the periphery, a realtor who gave them coordinates, a neighbor named Dan Clemens who talked to him for hours and turns out to have a past that reeks of violence and a plea deal for manslaughter. Is it a coincidence? In my line of work, I stopped believing in coincidences a long time ago. People keep secrets. They keep them in the mountains. They keep them in the hollows. And they keep them in the silence that follows a tragedy. The authorities ruled the deaths as undetermined, and in doing so, they left the door wide open for the truth to be buried under the mud and the rain. Someone knows what happened on that mountain. Someone knows why 3 people, including a little girl who deserved a future, ended up as nothing more than names of file. I have walked the halls of justice for a long time, and I tell you, justice is only as good as the people who are willing to fight for it. For the Jamisons, that fight has grown quiet. And that is a shame that will haunt me until my dying day. Human beings are peculiar creatures. They kill for the most trivial reasons imaginable, and they do so with a detachment that would chill the blood of any decent person. I have walked through the darkest corners of this world, and I tell you, the darkness inside a man is far deeper than any mountain range in Montana. You look at a case like this, and you ask yourself, how does a monster breathe the same air as the rest of us? My, you have to be kidding me if you think it is just a matter of circumstance. It is a matter of character or the complete lack thereof. Let us look at David Meyerhofer, a man with a record of service, a man who knows his way around a toolkit and a telephone wire, a man who, in the eyes of his neighbors, was just another face in the crowd, but behind that mask sat a void. He was a collector of lives, a man who saw other human beings not as souls, but as items to be acquired, cataloged, and ultimately discarded. You talk about profiling, about the infancy of a science that tried to put a name to the shadow, but deep down, it always comes back to the same thing. The The predators need to exert control over the innocent. Consider the Jaeger family. They were camping, seeking the simple joys of the Montana air, a family bonding over the rugged beauty of the wilderness. Then, in the silence of the early morning, the wind shifted. Not the mountain wind, but the cold breath of a monster slicing through canvas. Susie Jaeger was just a child, 7 years old, full of life and the innocent clutter of stuffed animals. She did not stand a chance against a man who had spent years preparing for his hunt. The psychological torment that followed, the taunting phone calls, the game of cat and mouse played with a mother's broken heart. It tells you everything you need to know about the killer. He was not just taking a life. He was attempting to own the grief that followed. It is a coward's way of feeling powerful. Then there's the internal landscape of the victim. Young Susie and Sandy Dickman. They were not just names in a file. They were individuals with dreams, fears, and a right to grow old. When you look at the evidence, the discarded belongings, the systematic erasure of their humanity through acts that I will not dignify by describing, you see the profound contrast between their light and the killer's darkness. He was looking for souvenirs, trophies to prove to himself that he had exerted his will over the world, but he was nothing more than a thief of light. I look at the investigation, and I see the frustration that comes when the system is not yet built to handle a wolf in sheep's clothing. They had the polygraphs, the so-called objective science. But science is only as good as the understanding of the person behind it. A psychopath can pass a test because he does not feel the weight of his own sins. He views the truth as just another obstacle to be bypassed, much like the locks on the doors or the lines on a telephone. When they finally found that freezer, packed away like common meat, it was a visceral reminder of how cold, how calculated, and how utterly empty this man was. He was not a complicated enigma. He was a hollow man filling his void with the lives of others. It is a tragedy that ends in a quiet cell, a final act of cowardice that denied the world the answers it deserved. Did he have other victims? The evidence in his home, the oddities in his history, all suggest a trail that we will likely never fully trace. That is the haunting reality of this business. You catch the monster, but the scars remain and the questions linger in the dark. I tell you, evil is rarely loud. It is quiet, it is patient, and it is waiting in the places you think you are safest. You have to be vigilant, because for every person like Marietta Jaeger, who fought with every fiber of her being for the truth, there is a predator watching from the edge of the firelight. It is a sobering reminder that while we look at the stars, there are those among us who are looking only for a place to hide their next crime. My. You see, the human heart is a complex, fragile machine. Sometimes it just stops beating, and other times it breaks in ways that defy everything we think we know about love, obsession, and the dark corners of the human psyche. I have seen the absolute worst of what people are capable of, and I tell you, it never gets any easier to stomach. First, let's look at Marlene Johnson. There's a woman who let her own insecurity turn into a corrosive acid. She lived in a world of high society and refined edges, yet inside, she was rotting. She became convinced that a beautiful, kind-hearted woman named Shirley Pierce was stealing her husband. Was there an affair? No, but facts rarely matter to the obsessed. Marlene was not just jealous. She was a predator. She spent hours, money, and agonizing effort to surveil a woman who was simply living her life. It was not just a hobby. It was a mission. When she finally snapped, it was with a cold, calculated violence that leaves me breathless. She killed Shirley in her own home. Then, as if she were tidying up a spilled glass of water, she tried to bleach away the evidence of her depravity. She thought she was untouchable, but she left behind a trail of vanity and rage that led us straight to her. When the verdict hit, that gasp she made on the floor, it was not the sound of remorse. It was the sound of a person who suddenly realized their carefully constructed bubble of denial had finally burst. Then you have the tragedy of the Byrne sisters. Now, this is a different kind of darkness. This is not the malice of a scorned woman. This is the crushing weight of a life sacrificed on the altar of duty. Barbara Burns gave up everything for her sister, Debbie. She was a mother, a nurse, a breadwinner, and a martyr, all before she was even out of her teens. She existed only to serve Debbie. For 40 years, she lived in shadow. When a sudden inheritance came, it was not the liberation they expected. It was the catalyst for their destruction. They were like children playing with matches in a house made of gasoline. When the money vanished, the facade shattered. Barbara, the woman who had never said no, finally reached the end of her endurance. She did not kill out of greed. She killed because she was a prisoner who had run out of walls to pace. She lived with the silence of that house for weeks, surrounded by air fresheners, a pathetic, desperate attempt to mask the smell of her own broken life. It is a haunting thought, is it not? Living day after day with the ghost of the sister you spent your entire life protecting. You look at these people and you have to wonder, what are we? Are we just products of our circumstances? Or do we all have a devil waiting for the right moment to step out? Marlene was a monster born of ego and possessiveness. Barbara was a soul crushed by decades of invisible labor and relentless demand. Both committed the unthinkable. Both destroyed lives that could never be repaired. You have to be kidding me if you think there is a simple explanation for why one person chooses to destroy the light in another human being. It is a tragedy, through and through, and I tell you, it is a heavy thing to carry. Seeing the wreckage left behind when the worst of us takes control. Human beings are strange creatures. They commit the most heinous acts for the most trivial reasons imaginable. And they do it with a coldness that would turn your blood to ice. My. You look at a case like this, and you realize that evil does not always wear a mask of a monster. Sometimes it wears the face of a roommate, someone who smiles at you across the breakfast table. I have walked the halls of the morgue more times than I care to count, and I tell you, the dead do not keep secrets, but they certainly know how to wait for them to surface. You have to be kidding me if you think you can hide the truth forever. In the mountains of Prescott, Arizona, during the late summer of 1988, a young life was extinguished, and the silence that followed was deafening. Pamela Pitts, a 19-year-old girl with a bright smile and a hunger for life, simply vanished. Her family, the people who were supposed to be her sanctuary, were left in a state of purgatory, wondering where their girl had gone. 13 days later, the truth was burned into the landscape of Gordo's Pit. A man searching for a target practice spot stumbled upon something that no human being should ever have to see. A body, scorched beyond recognition, treated with a level of cruelty that speaks to a deep, twisted rot inside the killer. When the medical examiner looked at what remained, he saw the work of a monster. Heat-killed fly larvae told a story of a life stolen, a body discarded, and an attempt to erase her existence with fire. People think they can hide their sins in the flames. But fire only leaves scars that investigators like us spend decades trying to read. We started with the inner circle, because in the business of murder, the person standing closest to you is usually the one holding the knife. Shelley Norgard, the roommate, a girl with a history of displacement, of abandonment, of looking for a family she could not find. There was a friction there, a tension born of unpaid rent and unspoken resentment. Shelley was a girl who talked about how to dispose of a body, who spoke of fire and mine shafts as if they were household chores. The arrogance of the guilty is a predictable trait. She thought she was clever, pointing fingers, painting pictures of satanic cults and ritual sacrifices, trying to lead us into the weeds of rumor and superstition. It is an old trick. When the path is dark, people see ghosts. They see demons where there are only humans with dark hearts. Years dragged on. The case grew cold, stagnant like water in a dead well. But death has a way of repeating its patterns. 3 years later, another body turned up, this one in a vertical mine shaft, wrapped in a waterbed liner. Ray Clerks, the boyfriend, the man who wanted to leave, the man who wanted a life that did not include Shelley. The evidence finally caught up to her, a single fingerprint on a flashlight, a trunk that reeked of a violent end. She pled guilty. She took her 20 years, and the world breathed a sigh of relief. thinking the shadow had passed. But the shadow had not moved. It was waiting for nearly 3 decades. Pam's family lived in a hollow space left by a justice that had been only half served. It was not until 2017 that a relentless detective, listening to 97 recorded jailhouse calls, heard the one thing that broke the seal. A silence, a pregnant, guilty silence when her father asked what really happened. That was the moment. That was the crack in the armor. When we finally brought her in, looking at her, you saw that look of defiant resignation. She had walked through life leaving a trail of bodies, convinced that she could curate her own reality, that she could talk her way out of the grave she had dug for others. She confessed eventually, a story of a heated argument, a frenzy of violence, and a girl who just stopped breathing. She claimed she hit her, over and over, until the life went out of her. It was not an accident. It was a manifestation of a deep, abiding hatred that had been boiling beneath the surface of a friendship that never really was. And then, the ultimate slap in the face of justice. She walked out, credit for time served. A murderer of 2 people, walking free, carrying the weight of her sins out into the world. You have to be kidding me. But I tell you, justice is a complicated animal. She confessed, she was convicted, and though the sentence feels like a hollow echo of what it should have been, the truth finally anchored itself in the light. Pam is gone, and Ray is gone, and the world is a little quieter, a little colder for it. You look at these cases, and you wonder about the nature of humanity, about how someone can look at a best friend or a lover and decide they are no longer human, just an object to be discarded. It is a terrifying thought, but it is the truth of the business. You learn that people do not kill for grand, cinematic reasons. They kill for the pettiest, most pathetic reasons imaginable, and they leave behind a wake of shattered lives that never truly heal. I have seen the darkest corners of the human condition, and if there is one thing I have learned, it is that the truth does not always set you free, but it is the only thing that keeps the memory of the innocent alive when everything else has been reduced to ash. Announced challenges to test the strength of love and human will. On a fiercely hot day in June of 2018, an unexpected health crisis struck, shattering the gentle rhythm of the house by the lake. On that day, Steve was meticulously tending to his velvet rose bushes out in the garden, sweating profusely beneath the harsh summer sun. Suddenly, he felt the sky spin before his eyes. The world turned upside down. A severe bout of vertigo hit him, accompanied by a twisting nausea in his stomach. He stumbled into the house, clutching his head, his voice weak and faint as he informed Lana about the sharp pain in his ear and the overwhelming discomfort surging through his body. Moments later, his strong body collapsed onto the grassy lawn near the porch. He was continuously ill, entirely losing his clear sense of awareness. Seeing her beloved husband, who was the very embodiment of strength and agility, collapse so weakly, Lana felt her heart constrict. She knew very well that he had a history of suffering from benign vertigo spells, but the severity had never been this frightening. Steve faintly explained to her that he felt absolutely terrible, his head spinning and pounding violently, in a mild state of delirium. He mistakenly believed that he had simply suffered heat stroke from staying out in the garden too long under the brutal weather conditions. Relying on her instincts and her solid professional knowledge as a former medical nurse, Lana quickly regained her composure. She understood that, at this moment, absolute bed rest in a quiet, cool room was the best possible medicine for him. She helped him walk up the stairs, carefully tucked him in with a blanket, and stood guard by his side without moving a single step away. Steve sank into a remarkably deep sleep, so deep that all his senses seemed completely frozen. According to what he would recall much later, from the moment he closed his eyes, time seemed to drift into the void. When he finally gathered enough strength to slightly open his heavy eyelids, 36 long hours had passed. Hearing the news that her brother had suddenly fallen ill, his sister living far away became incredibly panicked and worried. She immediately called her sister-in-law, her voice laden with anxiety, desperately seeking a logical explanation for this bizarre illness. To her, The idea of a man who was always overflowing with vitality, regardless of his age, falling into a state of deep exhaustion and losing awareness for 36 hours was a highly unusual and deeply concerning phenomenon. Over the phone, Lana used her inherently calm, gentle, and warm voice to reassure her sister-in-law. She firmly stated that the situation was entirely under control. She assured her that Steve was stable and that she was closely monitoring every breath and every minor expression he made. Even though he had never experienced such a terrifying health episode before, she maintained her professional confidence, believing that this was simply the consequence of utter exhaustion caused by working and moving at maximum capacity for far too long. Her sincere and professional words managed to soothe a significant portion of the anxiety churning within the younger sister's heart. The sister felt much more at ease knowing that her brother was being cared for by a woman who possessed not only deep love, but also a solid foundation of medical knowledge. Everyone silently agreed that Steve's massive energy reserves and his lifestyle of always operating at full speed had finally forced his body to demand a mandatory strike to get some well-deserved rest. Chapter 6, Awakening in Loving Arms. The days that followed were a long period that tested the endurance and the love of both husband and wife. The house by the lake lost its usual ringing laughter, replaced by the quietness of healing and rest. Lana stood watch by the sickbed. She personally prepared every easily digestible meal, checked his temperature, and wiped the beads of sweat from his forehead. Her eyes were always filled with deep empathy, but remained incredibly resolute. She did not allow herself to break down, because she knew she was his only pillar of support during this trial. Steve lay on the bed, his body weak, completely unable to perform the simplest personal tasks. For a proud man who always loved being independent and taking care of others, this sudden helplessness was a heavy psychological blow. Yet, it was exactly in these moments of profound vulnerability that he truly felt the sacred depth of their marital bond. Every caring gesture, every whispered word of encouragement, and her forgiving eyes that showed no annoyance when cleaning up the messes caused by the illness, everything became deeply engraved into his soul. There were times when he woke up in the middle of the night. The dim light of the nightstand lamp cast a soft glow on his wife's face, which looked tired and worn from lack of sleep. Looking at her, a profound sense of tender love surged in his heart. He realized that no matter how powerful a businessman he was out in the world, no matter how much wealth he held in his hands, when facing the fragile line of health and mortality, the only thing that truly saved him, the only thing holding eternal value, was the small woman nodding off by the edge of his bed. Her love was not loud. It was not dazzlingly flashy. It was enduring, resilient, and refreshing, like a cool stream washing over his soul. Family and friends also continuously sent their regards, nourishing gifts, and the most sincere prayers to him. Any initial panic or excessive worry completely vanished in the face of the unconditionally devoted care provided by his faithful wife. Sickness, instead of being a tragic sentence, became a purifying fire, refining their family bonds and making their marital love even more brilliant and solid. Fueled by his own fears for to live, combined with proper medical care, and, most importantly, the boundless love of his wife, a true miracle occurred. Steve gradually regained his full awareness. The dizzy spells reduced in both frequency and intensity. His pale complexion was slowly replaced by a healthy, rosy glow. He started to be able to sit up on his own, taking his very first steps after a long series of days chained to the bed. The day he managed to walk out his room independently, standing before the large window looking out at the sunlit, sparkling lake, he felt as though he had been reborn. He turned around to look at his wife, standing behind him. Her eyes were brimming with tears, but her lips held a radiant smile. He opened his arms wide, fully embracing her small body, a tight hug that substituted for thousands of the deepest words of gratitude. From that exact second, he silently promised himself that for the entire second half of his life, he would live not only for his own passions, but to repay the immense dedication of this wonderful woman. Chapter 7, The Symphony of Life. just 2 weeks after the greatest storm of their lives. It seemed that Lana's dedicated treatment methods and boundless love had produced a miraculous effect. Steve recovered spectacularly, quickly regaining his brilliant energy as if the crisis had never happened. A fierce vitality rose within him, urging him to do something truly special to celebrate his own revival, while simultaneously expressing his gratitude to everyone who had stood by his side during the tempest. And there was nothing more wonderful than throwing a grand celebration the 4th of July, right on the grounds of their memory-filled house by the lake. The party that day exploded with joy and perfection, exactly like every other event he had ever hosted. He appeared radiant, hugging and kissing everyone. His hearty laughter and his familiar, warm, enthusiastic personality had fully returned. The crisp air of the summer evening blended perfectly with the buzzing sounds of cheerful conversation, the delicious scent of grilled food, and the popping clinks of sparkling wine glasses, creating a flawless portrait of absolute happiness. The music began to play, carrying lively, upbeat melodies. Never one to miss an opportunity. Steve immediately stepped forward, took his wife's hand, and pulled her right to the middle of the grass. The two merged into a skillful, passionate dance. Seeing that beautiful image, the people around them could not sit still. They followed suit, stepping onto the makeshift dance floor, sharing the same rhythm, all blending into a magnificent dance to celebrate life. Watching her strong, robust brother hold his wife tightly and give her a long, passionate kiss amidst the applause of the crowd, his youngest sister silently shed tears of pure happiness. She firmly believed that their love was the most sincere, original, and deep love possible. That love had conquered illness, overcoming the harshest trials of time and circumstance. When the night sky lit up with colorful bursts of fireworks, Steve stepped onto a slightly raised platform, asking everyone for a moment of silence. Using his warm voice, which occasionally choked with emotion, he sent his deepest thanks to all his friends, his family, and everyone who had worried about him. Most especially, his gaze fixed upon his wife, who was standing below, smiling gently. He called her his guardian angel, the most valuable miracle medicine that no billionaire could ever purchase with mere money. He declared that all wealth and all business success became utterly meaningless without good health and without a warm embrace to return to. Everything in the little house by the lake returned to its peaceful, bright orbit, and now, absolutely no one in the family held even the tiniest doubt that the couple continued to enjoy a profoundly peaceful, long, and happy life together. Having weathered the turbulent storms, they understood, respected, and loved each other even more. The life of the great businessman had turned toward a beautiful new direction. It was no longer about conquering endless material peaks, but rather a journey to cultivate peace within the soul, to spread love, and to inspire a positive, optimistic attitude toward life for absolutely everyone. The story closes with the image of the husband and wife sitting closely together on lounge chairs on their porch, quietly watching the still lake water sparkling under the moonlight. Their love, having transcended all boundaries, proved a simple yet profoundly deep truth. Wherever there is sincere love, there is eternal life. Forgiveness, tolerance, and absolute kindness are the brightest lights that guide humanity, chasing away all darkness and bringing ultimate healing and immortal hope to the world. This is a story of a successful and generous businessman who meets a nurse with a heart as big as his own. She struck his family as being very quiet, but very sweet and very nice. He falls head over heels, unable to hide the feelings he had for her. He was very much in love with her. But when a mysterious sickness consumes their marriage, his family just knew that there was something profoundly wrong. They realized that money is no protection, and this was not a natural departure. Welcome to a celebration of life, family, and the enduring power of truth. The story begins on March 10th, 2007, in the sunny, vibrant city of Miami. It is a big day for a beautiful bride named Rosemary Clayton and her entire family. She is finally marrying her great love, William Leslie. Walking her down the aisle is her oldest brother, 52-year-old Steve Clayton. He beams with immense pride. 11 months prior to her wedding, they lost their beloved father. Rosemary had asked her brother if he would step in. Naturally, there were a lot of tears. She could not imagine anybody else standing in place for their father. When the minister asks who gives this woman to be married to this man, Steve speaks up with a steady, heartfelt voice, saying he does so in the memory of their father. It is a deeply sentimental moment for everyone gathered at something so special, a space where their father is not physically present, but is felt in every beat of their hearts. With their father having passed away, Rosemary's older brother Steve is now the head of the family. And even though he has never had children of his own, he has always been a father figure to his siblings. When their father and mother were married, Steve was just about 2 or 3 years old. He had 4 younger sisters, and Rosemary is the youngest. He was 10 years older than her. So there really was not a single moment when Steve was not a guiding light in her life. Steve was her big brother, and he was her absolute hero. He was everything a little girl would want in an older sibling. He played football, he wrestled in high school, and his strength and protective nature made him larger than life for her. After graduating high school, Steve continues his education and graduates from college with a degree in finance. His natural intellect and drive quickly help him mature into a shrewd, highly capable businessman. Together with a trusted partner, Steve started a company called Physical Therapy Resources. Through sheer dedication, that small enterprise eventually became a massive national company, boasting physical therapy centers located all over the country. He was incredibly successful and eventually sold his interest in his business. Basically, from that point onward, he was retired. His lifelong goal was to retire at the age of 40. He only missed it by 1 single year, retiring proudly when he was 41. Selling his business completely frees up Steve to do whatever he wants. And what he wants to do, more than anything else in the world, is to give back to his community. He dedicated himself to mentoring a massive group of young men, helping them start their own businesses, or simply helping them find out what direction they wanted their lives to go. Steve was extremely generous, not only with his financial resources, but more importantly, with his time. And Steve always, without fail, has time for his family. Rosemary often films him as Steve affectionately teases their relatives. His humor is something truly special. Their father was not known for being particularly funny. He was a much more serious man. But Steve brings light and laughter wherever he goes. When his sister Rosemary gets married, it is Steve's incredible good humor that makes him the absolute life and soul of the occasion. He is always the first person to stand up and give a toast at any gathering. His words are always spoken without notes, entirely ad-libbed directly from his heart. During his toast, he admits that he uses his humor as a way of shying away from the deeply emotional stuff. He looks at William and thanks him profoundly for making his sister so incredibly happy. Steve is never one to hide his true emotions. He tells the room that before their father passed away, he told Steve to take care of his sisters, to honor their family, and that he loved them all very much. After wiping away a stray tear, Steve regains his joyful composure, praising the newlyweds as great companions and perfect partners, noting he has never seen his sister happier. After the speeches, Steve steps up for the traditional father and daughter dance. He comes up and they get ready to dance. But right before the music begins to play, they share a very powerful, unforgettable moment. A surprise audio recording of their dearly departed father is played over the speakers. In the recording, their father says that the absolute best moment of his day was when his little girl would climb onto his knee and say that she loved him. He says he misses those days and that he loves her too. On that day, Steve had so many vital duties. He was standing in for their dad. He was the best man. He was the main entertainment. He was the person who kept everyone calm. And he was the one who kept everyone laughing. He was an absolute natural at bringing people together. Despite his massive professional success and his close, loving network of family and wonderful friends, Steve's own romantic life has been somewhat rocky over the years. He continually looked for a partner who was as focused, determined, loving, and caring as he was. And that is always a very tall order to fill. Now 52 years old, his family figures it will take a very special, unique person to sweep him off his feet. Steve was always searching for somebody on a level he could truly connect with emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. 3 years later, that is exactly what appears to happen. In late 2009, Steve decides to leave his home state of Florida for a refreshing change of pace in the beautiful state of North Carolina. He really loved being physical. He loved walking. He loved hiking. And he loved absolutely anything to do with being outdoors in the fresh air. So when he moved from the flatlands of South Florida to the rolling hills of North Carolina, he had the wonderful opportunity to be outdoors a lot more. Within just a few short months of his move, Steve excitedly announces to his family that he has met someone very special. He seems to have a radiant glow about him that he had been missing for quite a little while, and he is bubbling with excitement. Her name is Lana Walsh. She is 12 years his junior, and she is a medical nurse who grew up in the state of Oklahoma. She strikes his family as being very sweet. She is noticeably quiet, but very pleasant. This quietness stands out quite a bit, because Steve is definitely not a quiet person. Steve's personality is gigantic and room-filling, while she is much more like a gentle wallflower. Despite their obvious differences in personality, Steve is absolutely sure she is the one he has been waiting for. They are very affectionate with each other, constantly walking arm in arm. Steve is always hugging her, squeezing her hand and kissing her cheek. His family feels immensely happy for their brother. They decide that naturally, anybody that he loved so deeply, they were going to embrace with wide open arms. It is not a long time before Steve asks Lana to move in with him. After they got to know each other quite a bit more, Steve persuaded her to come live with him in the bustling city of Charlotte. Steve has always been very convincing when he wants something. Soon, they add some new, joyful additions to their growing family. The very first dog that Steve and Lana get is named Guinness, an elegant Italian greyhound. They both absolutely love the breed, and so they quickly decided that they wanted another one. The second dog is named Sadie. With Lana, Steve finally feels he's found his missing puzzle piece in life. Steve always has wonderful, glowing things to say about her. He affectionately refers to her as his Lana Sue. He simply cannot hide the deep feelings he has for her. He is very much in love with her. His siblings feel that Steve has found himself wonderfully well grounded with Lana. They feel like Steve has finally found a certain, enduring sense of peace with her. Steve Clayton came to North Carolina for a fresh change from his old life and ended up finding a whole new, beautiful future. When Steve Clayton danced with his sister at her beautiful wedding, he dreamed of one day finding his own special someone. And now, 6 years later, he is about to marry the love of his life, a Veterans Affairs nurse named Lana Walsh. It is a lovely, crisp day in November 2013. Many family members and friends had traveled all the way to North Carolina just to be there and enjoy that spectacular day with him. And he made it very special for every single guest. Lana and Steve's wedding takes place right at their lovely house in Charlotte. It is such a beautiful, intimate event. Everyone in attendance could just see the love absolutely beaming from both of them. Soon after tying the knot, the happy couple decide to relocate and move into what they consider their forever home, located just over the border in South Carolina, resting peacefully on the scenic banks of Lake Wylie. It looks exactly like something printed on a holiday postcard. It is a gorgeous ocean blue home sitting on a breathtaking piece of lakefront property. It is remarkably lovely. The couple enthusiastically sets about refurbishing their new home, decorating it carefully with Steve's massive collection of fine artworks and historical antiques. Steve was the kind of person for whom objects were very deeply personal. He was extremely proud of his treasured possessions, as they were all unique and carried a special story. The move allows the couple to fully indulge in their shared love of nature. If there was ever something fun and outdoors to do in the community. Steve was always going to be the very first one there, and he was always incredibly gung-ho about it. Their relocation to South Carolina also means the pair are much closer to Steve's extended family. A young man who married Steve's niece in 2010 officially became his nephew, and they spent a great deal of time together. The younger relatives hang out with Steve and Lana a lot once they move up there. They frequently go out to dinner with them. They attend live music concerts together, and they make sure to go to special community events for every single holiday. They're also just a 30-minute drive away from Lana's own son and her young grandchildren, and the pair absolutely never say no to a bit of joyous babysitting. Steve always had a magical way with children, because Steve has always been a pure child at heart. He is exactly the kind of guy who happily gets down on the floor and plays endlessly with the kids, singing songs like Pop Goes the Weasel, and with the kids around the house. There's absolutely never a dull or quiet moment in the Clayton household. Lana often films Steve as he attempts to hilariously describe the rules of the limbo game while her twin granddaughters watch him with mild amusement. He bends down low, explaining that there is a stick, and he has to go under the stick, and he has to get real low to get under it. He enthusiastically tells them it is a fun game and a dance, demanding they tell him how to act it out. Lana is highly tickled by performance, but the young twins are far more interested in eating their sweet ice cream. Steve enjoyed playing all different kinds of games, whether it was a strategic game of Scrabble or even a silly, simple Child-Us game with plastic spinners and handles. He was a huge, lovable teddy bear. The children absolutely loved to play with him, and he always had kids happily hanging on his arms and legs. Lana is always totally game for some fun, too, cheering him on and joining in the boisterous laughter. 5 blissful years into their marriage, Steve and Lana appear to be thriving wonderfully. But in June 2018, Steve suddenly falls quite ill. He says he feels extremely dizzy, complaining of severe vertigo. He says that his ear hurts terribly and that he feels deeply nauseous. He starts feeling sick while working out in the yard. Lana feels very bad for him, knowing that he had experienced minor issues with vertigo prior to this incident. He tells his family he had been very ill and did not know exactly what was wrong. He just remembers that he was working out in the garden, tending to the plants, and he started to feel unusually dizzy with a pounding headache. He initially thought that maybe he had gotten a bad case of sunstroke. As a trained medical nurse, Lana thinks the absolute best thing for Steve is total bed rest. Steve later tells his family that he remembered laying down in his bed, and the very next time he opened his eyes, an entire 36 hours had passed by. Deeply worried about this strange occurrence, Rosemary calls Lana to see if she can explain Steve's mystery illness. Rosemary asks her what she thought was going on, because it is very odd for any healthy person of any age to completely lose 36 hours of time. Lana calmly assures her that he was fine, and that she was watching him closely, making sure he was okay, though he has never been ill quite like this before in his life. Lana theorizes that Steve is just severely exhausted from his active lifestyle. Rosemary feels reassured knowing that Lana is there to take care of him in any way that she could, especially with her extensive professional knowledge as a nurse. It seems to the family that Steve's larger-than-life energy and constant activity are finally starting to catch up with him. But just 2 short weeks later, it appears Lana's home treatment has worked miracles. Steve is back to his vibrant, old self, happily throwing a massive celebration party for the 4th of July. That summer party was just as incredibly great as every other party the family had been to at their beautiful home. Steve was his normal, highly affectionate self, and everybody had a truly magnificent time. Guests watched Steve dancing joyfully with Lana as they celebrate in high style. He grabs Lana right away, and the rest of the family just kind of follows suit and all join in the dancing. Relatives remember watching them hug tightly and him kissing her tenderly, looking like a couple who were completely and utterly in love. Things appeared to be perfect at the Clayton home. And no one there doubts for a second that Lana and Steva's lives are going to be happy, healthy, and long. On July 21st, 2018, a distressing call comes into the York County Emergency Services dispatcher. Police units arrive quickly on the scene. The body camera footage recorded by the responding officer, Sergeant Day, captures what they discover upon arrival. As they walk through the grand front door, there is Steve, resting right at the bottom of the majestic grand staircase. And very unfortunately, at that point, he has passed away. The officers can hear someone whispering and talking in low, distressed voices. That is because Lana Clayton is sitting just around the corner, looking distraught and crying heavily. The officers kindly lower their voices, so they do not say anything that is further disturbing to her in her time of profound grief. Sergeant Day needs to talk gently with Steve's U.S. wife, Lana, to find out what exactly has happened. He introduces himself, saying he will be there for just a little while until the county coroner arrives to transport the departed. Lana tells Sergeant Day that Steve had been suffering from severe dizziness for 2 straight days. She explains that Stephen had been very ill with his vertigo again. She says she had found him on Thursday morning when he stood up, got extremely dizzy, and collapsed. She recounts that she had to carefully help him upstairs to their bedroom, and since that specific time, he had not been back downstairs at all. When the officer asks if she had been working outside, she nods, saying she was mowing the green lawn real quick. And when she came back inside the house, she found he had fallen down the stairs. She cries, apologizing, saying she bravely tried to slide a soft blanket underneath him to comfort him, but she could not revive him. Despite her extensive medical training, Lana was completely unable to render effective aid to Steve. She explains to the officers that she panicked because she knew she could not do anything further to help him medically, so she immediately ran outside when she heard a loud motorcycle coming by, desperately waving the driver down to ask them to call emergency services. Steve's nephew, a young man named Nick, is actually on duty working as a dedicated police officer when he receives the devastating news. His mother called him crying, and she said that Uncle Steve had died. He was in total disbelief. He knew it was real, but it simply did not fully sink into his mind. He rushed down to the lake house as quickly as he possibly could. He remembers the whole time driving. The only words going through his head were questioning how and why this could happen. When the phone rang for Rosemary, who was living 700 miles away, and she heard her nephew say that Uncle Steve had died, she thought it was completely impossible. How could her great protector be gone? She simply could not believe it. With Rosemary so far away, Nick and the local family members immediately rally around Lana to offer their unwavering support. Nick felt awful because he knew how deeply she loved Uncle Steve. He kept thinking that while he was terribly upset, he could not even begin to imagine what she was going through, having to find her beloved husband on the ground like that. Lana tearfully tells the family she fears Steve a severe vertigo could have caused a tragic fall down the grand stairs. She keeps repeating that she thinks he fell down the stairs, that it is horrible, and she hopes he did not suffer. Sergeant Day, being a thorough professional, carefully checks for any signs that Steve may have been attacked or involved in a struggle. To his trained eye, this looked like it was very probably a sad but natural death, but he knows he must follow protocol. So Sergeant Day proceeds to go upstairs to look and see what might have happened prior to the fall. Walking to the massive labyrinth-like house was a little unnerving, but he finds nothing amiss. He notes that there does not appear to be any sign of a physical struggle. There are absolutely no other signs of someone else being up there or having done something harmful to him. There is nothing significant at all. In the large master bedroom, the bed sheet is all rumpled up, but there is nothing to suggest Steve had any kind of violent struggle. It heavily looks as if the cause of death will not be a mystery for the medical coroner. Upon arrival, the coroner cannot see any contusions, scrapes, or bruises. There is nothing on his body that suggests Steve actually fell down the hard wooden staircase. It looks much more as though Steve managed to make it down to the very bottom of the stairs safely, and then suddenly collapsed. The coroner gently suggests that she believes he likely had a massive heart attack. When asked what leads her to that medical opinion, She explains that the specific coloration of his face and a distinct blueness that went straight across the top of his chest in a line is oftentimes an indication of a cardiac event. Back in the quiet living room, Sergeant Day gently tells Lana what the authorities think has happened. He explains that when he walked to the top of the stairs, he noticed that the soft carpet on the staircase had a specific direction to the fibers, allowing him to see clear footprints. He believes Steve may have safely come to the bottom of the staircase before passing. He tells Lana not to dwell on the scary thought of the staircase, knowing that is a very hard image for a grieving widow to hold in her mind. He offers comforting words, suggesting that perhaps this was simply the day that the heavens chose to call him home. While Lana digests the overwhelming news, Nick and his family step up to help with cleaning up the house. They deeply wanted to make the big house still comfortable enough for her, knowing she was going to be physically and emotionally exhausted and had to spend a lonely night there. But they are profoundly shocked at what they eventually find in the master bedroom. When they go upstairs to tidy up, they immediately notice a terribly strong smell. It is the undeniable smell of human waste. They look around the room and discover huge discoloration spots right in the middle of the expensive mattress. The soiled mattress immediately raises some very serious questions in their minds. They realize that the massive amount of liquid it would take to soak completely through a thick mattress meant Steve had been confined to that bed, unable to move, for several days. They immediately decide they have to get this ruined mattress out of the room, so Lana can sleep. They can barely pick it up because it is extremely heavy. They manage to take the mattress and carefully remove it from the house. When Rosemary finally manages to talk with Lana on the phone later that evening, she gently asks her how Steve got so incredibly ill. Lana replies that he had not been feeling well for a few days. Rosemary asks why she did not call somebody, why she did not let the family know so they could help. Lana calmly replies that he was starting to feel much better, so there was no need to worry them. She also mentions that Steve never called anyone himself because he had been sleeping very heavily and had misplaced his mobile cell phone a full week earlier. Lana claimed that the phone had been missing for several days. This detail strikes Rosemary as profoundly wrong. Her brother was never, ever without his phone. He was a businessman who was always attached to his communication device. It went absolutely everywhere with him. It was at that exact point where Rosemary really felt like something very unusual and perhaps sinister was going on, even though she did not know what it was. Shortly after, Steve's sister asked his widow about his legal will. Steve and Rosemary had talked many times over the years about what it was that he specifically wanted to do when his time came. He had clearly stated he wanted to be buried in that beautiful, peaceful cemetery down in Fort Lauderdale. But when Rosemary asks Lana about the documents, Lana states firmly that there is no will at all. Furthermore, Lana has already made permanent arrangements. Steve is scheduled to be quickly cremated, and she is already planning a rapid memorial service. On August 4th, 2018, Lana holds a memorial service for Steve at their beautiful lakefront home. It is a highly emotional gathering. Everybody there felt such an incredibly deep, loving connection to Steve. It was very hard for anyone to stay completely calm, even though it was supposed to be a joyous celebration of his magnificent life. They just could not help but feel the deep, deep sorrow radiating from everybody present. The speakers reminded guests that if there is any space where it is perfectly okay to be sad and to cry a little bit, this is that time. They celebrate a life exceptionally well lived while honoring their sadness. At the memorial, Rosemary and the rest of the family are quite surprised to find that Lana has already started to completely clear out Steve's personal belongings. She had already begun taking all of his nice clothes and all of his personal items, claiming she had donated them all to the local Veterans Affairs charity. Rosemary is almost knocked off her feet to see the massive number of empty wooden hangers hanging silently in that giant closet, with not a single stitch of his clothing remaining. The family also notices a lot of expensive watches are missing, a lot of fine jewelry is missing, and even his treasured wedding ring is mysteriously missing. Lana's adamant claims about Steve not having a legal will raise even further deeper suspicions among the tight-knit family. That is something that Steve had discussed with many people, emphasizing how important it was to make sure that everything in life was in perfect order. There is absolutely no logical sense in her brother, a former accountant and a person who is meticulously careful with his finances, not having a legally binding will prepared. The family collectively feels like something is just not adding up correctly. They are all on the same page. They know something unusual is going on behind the scenes. And that was when the family collectively decided to call the county medical examiner's office and respectfully plead with them to please perform a full autopsy. They asked that, at the very least, if the office is not going to do a full procedure, to please perform a comprehensive toxicology test. Thankfully, the authorities agreed to their earnest request. A dedicated detective named Motes from the York County Sheriff's Office is also officially notified of the family as growing suspicions regarding Steve's sudden passing. When the initial autopsy report comes in, it lists standard signs of heart disease and points to death by natural causes, exactly as the coroner first suspected. However, the authorities have to wait patiently for the full toxicologist's report to come back from the state laboratory to finally make an actual, legally binding finding. It will take a few long, agonizing weeks before those detailed results arrive. The family waits on pins and needles for the absolute truth to finally come out. They just know in their hearts that there was something very wrong. When the final toxicology report on Steve Clayton's blood comes back, the results are nothing short of shocking. The blood work shows clear traces of several powerful sedatives, including medical marijuana, strong sleeping medications, and allergy antihistamines. But that is not all. The biggest, most alarming shock in the entire toxicology results is the massive presence of a chemical compound called tetrahydrozoline. It is the primary active ingredient commonly found in standard over-the-counter eye drops. This specific chemical is absolutely never meant to be ingested internally by a human being. Given in small accidental doses, it makes a person feel very ill, causing severe nausea, extreme dizziness, and eventually causing them to pass out. But in large, concentrated quantities, it is incredibly deadly. It systematically shuts the central nervous system down and will cause fatal organ failure. The medical detectives learned from the experts that this chemical can severely limit the vital blood supply to major organs, ultimately leading directly to an induced heart attack. When the detectives carefully review the original body camera footage from the bedroom, they spot a tiny bottle of eye drops resting high up on the very top of a tall wooden dresser, located far away from the soil bed. That is a place where a gravely ill man, who was entirely too weak to even walk to a bathroom, could absolutely not get up to reach. Now, it is very clear to the trained investigators, this is not a natural death. Detective Motes knows he needs to have a very serious talk with Lana Clayton. 5 weeks after the sudden, tragic death of her husband, Lana Clayton is formally questioned by the detectives in a quiet interview room. They begin gently, treating her like a helpful witness. The detectives simply state they want to know a little more about the various medications found in Steve's blood system. Lana confidently lists several items, saying he took standard allergy pills and other common remedies. It is a long list, but there is absolutely no mention of the eye drop chemical. The substance that ended Steve's life is colorless, it is completely odorless, and it is entirely tasteless. This makes it the perfect, invisible tool to give to someone if a person wants to secretly poison them through their food or drink. The level of the chemical in Steve's blood was so exceptionally high that it was abundantly clear to the medical scientists that it was the direct cause of his death. It is a lethal level, no matter what way anyone tries to look at it. The detectives press on with their questioning. They calmly inform Lana that somehow or another, there was a very large amount of eye drop fluid found in his system, and that is what they are trying to get to the bottom of. Lana suddenly stammers, claiming she knows he sometimes puts the eye drops in his morning coffee, stating he puts it in there every day. When asked what she knows about the effects of drinking it, she nervously replies that she knows it makes a person have severe digestive issues. There are basically two distinct theories that the police are now heavily considering. One, he was intentionally poisoned and there is malicious foul play involved. Two, he ingested it completely on his own, whether it was intentional or bizarre, unintentional accident. But as the police deeply probe Steve and Lana's marital relationship, her story begins to shift dramatically. When asked how her life has been, she says that sometimes they would have fun, but then sometimes she would be walking on eggshells. She claims she was on eggshells all the time. Lana attempts to claim that Steve had a secret, dark side. She says he could be really nasty and verbally abusive, calling her terrible names. She claims his anger built up over time, and she would try to just stay out of his way to avoid him exploding in rage. After Lana's initial interview concludes, the detectives immediately order a comprehensive search of the beautiful lakefront house. They are meticulously looking for drinking cups or glass tumblers that might have a chemical residue left in them. They are looking for absolutely anything they can find that helps them definitively determine what could have caused this tragedy, including any documents or diaries that would show true trouble in the marriage. During that exact same time, feeling the pressure mounting, Lana tells a local officer that she urgently wants to speak again with Detective Moats. Detective Moats carefully records what Lana has to voluntarily say. She cries, claiming she had told him a little bit about Stephen, but that his behavior was supposedly much worse than what she originally stated. She weaves a tale of escalating arguments. Then she says that after he had that initial incident, which she said was vertigo, she was taking care of him, but she was secretly still very angry at him. She claims a girlfriend at her medical workplace had once told her that if you want to get even with somebody, you put eye drops in their drink, and it will cause severe stomach upset. It is right then that Lana drops a massive, undeniable confession. She says that when she saw that bottle of eye drops sitting on the table, a dark thought just came to her, and she just took it and squirted it. When the detective calmly asks what she squirted it into, she replies that she put it into his drinking water. The detective asks about the exact amount, and she admits she thinks she put the entire bottle in. She says she squeezed it hard. She just saw it there, and she just did it. She then tearfully asks the detective what will happen if she causes death with the drops. The detective asks if there is anything else she wants to add to get it all off her chest, but she says that is everything. It is a completely damning confession, but the detectives cannot arrest Lana just yet, as they must follow strict legal protocols. After Lana confessed, the police calmly left the building. They needed to get all their legal ducks in a row as far as what specific charges would be presented to the judge, and they planned to come back the very next day to officially arrest Lana Clayton. But early that next morning, the police get a frantic call from one of Lana's close neighbors. They have found notes indicating severe distress. The neighbor is terrified that Lana has harmed herself. She knew the police were coming back the next day, and she knew they would have official warrants for her arrest. She turned the kitchen gas stove on, went upstairs to her bedroom, and took a large quantity of pills to escape justice. Emergency responders find her unconscious in her bed. She is swiftly taken into the local hospital, where she is medically treated, stabilized, and ultimately released. Upon her release from the medical facility, she is immediately arrested and placed in handcuffs on the severe charges of causing the passing of another person and tampering with food items. The extended family is quickly informed of Lana's stunning arrest. A detective from the York County Department called Nick and said he wanted to bring him up to speed, informing him that Lana had officially confessed. Nick was driving and had to pull his vehicle over the side of the road right away. The news hit him like a heavy ton of bricks. He felt completely stunned when he called Rosemary. She answered the phone and began weeping uncontrollably upon hearing the final, terrible truth. On January 16, 2020, after a lengthy legal process, Lana accepts a formal plea deal. She admits legal guilt on the serious charges of voluntary manslaughter and tampering with a drug or food product. During the proceedings, she insists she only relied on knowledge she saw in fictional movies, claiming she only wanted to cause him temporary discomfort and absolutely never intended for Steve to pass away. She claimed she just wanted revenge for his supposed poor behavior. But Steve's lifelong friends and his devoted family do not buy her story for a single second. They know Steve was never an unkind person. They feel she is merely trying to unfairly assassinate Steve's good character to save herself. Numerous other people who knew him well, including the many young men whom he had generously mentored over the decades, all proudly came forward to testify that he was a wonderfully kind person. They declared there was absolutely no cruelty of any sort within Stephen. The prosecutors assert she was simply trying to do whatever she could to save herself from a very long sentence in prison and possibly avoid the ultimate legal penalty. Everyone who truly knew him knew he was a profoundly gentle soul, completely incapable of harming someone. Based on the detailed scientific evidence in the toxicology report, the sharp prosecutors believe Steve suffered silently for 3 full days. Lana had told the police that the fatal dose was given on Thursday morning. But the legal team knows as a matter of absolute scientific fact, straight from the toxicologist, that her timeline is biologically impossible. The amount in his system was so massive that he would pass away on Thursday morning if she had given it all to him at once. For him to have been incapacitated for all of that time, it heavily indicates that she continually gave him the toxic medication throughout those days, poisoning him little by little. And Lana, a fully trained medical nurse, never once sought to call for professional help. The prosecutors point out that Stephen would never have willingly stayed in a ruined, soiled bed. He was known to be an incredibly neat and clean person. He would not have stood for such a thing if he had the physical strength to prevent it. He was made entirely too weak to get up and move. There was no mobile phone left in the room, and there was no landline telephone, so he could not call somebody for rescue. This put him in a terrible situation, isolated with no way to get help. And so finally, knowing he was trapped, she squeezed the rest of the bottle into his water, had him drink it, and then casually went outside to mow the green grass in the sunshine, so she did not have to watch the final moments. Instead of acting as a nurse who heals and helps, she acted with unimaginable coldness. He expressed his boundless love for the newlyweds, calling them wonderful companions and the most perfect partners in life. He firmly stated that he had never seen his sister look so radiantly happy. Following the emotional speeches, he stepped onto the dance floor to perform the traditional father and daughter dance. Stepping in for the man they all missed so dearly. Just as the music was about to begin, an incredibly surprising and poignant moment unfolded. A secret audio recording of their beloved father's voice suddenly echoed through the hall. The warm, familiar voice recounted that his favorite memory of the day was always when his little girl would climb onto his knee and tell him she loved him. He expressed a deep, aching longing for those days and reaffirmed his endless love for his daughter. On that joyous day, the eldest brother wore many hats. He was a father figure. He was the best man. He was the primary source of entertainment. He was the calming presence, keeping everything running smoothly, and he was the one ensuring the laughter never ceased. He handled all of these roles with effortless grace. Despite his brilliant career and a tightly knit network of family and friends, his own romantic life had often been fraught with challenges. He constantly searched for a life partner who shared his intense focus, his unwavering determination, and his boundless capacity for love and care. That was, admittedly, a very tall order to fill. Now at 52, his family assumed it would require a truly extraordinary woman to finally sweep him off his feet. He yearned to find someone with whom he could connect on every conceivable level emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. Then, 3 years later, the very thing everyone had hoped for finally came to pass. In the late months of 2009, he decided to leave his home state to seek a fresh rhythm of life in a new, more distant region. He was a man with a profound passion for physical activity. He loved walking and immersing himself in anything related to the great outdoors. Relocating to this new area provided him with the perfect opportunity to spend much more time surrounded by nature. Within just a few short months of settling into his new surroundings, he joyfully announced his family that he had met someone incredibly special. Her presence in his life seemed to reignite a radiant glow that he had been missing for quite some time. He was overflowing with excitement and passion. Her name was Gentle and Soft, a nurse who hailed from a rural background, 12 years his junior. To his family, she appeared to be an incredibly sweet, quiet woman who simply radiated politeness. Her deeply reserved nature was a stark contrast to his loud, vibrant, and relentlessly energetic personality. If his character was a roaring, brilliant fire, she was like a small, unassuming flower resting quietly against a wall. Despite these glaring differences, he remained absolutely convinced that she was the perfect missing half he had spent his life searching for. They were constantly affectionate with one another, always walking arm in arm. He never missed a chance to hug her, hold her tight, and shower her with happy kisses. His family was genuinely thrilled for him. Anyone he loved so dearly, his family was more than ready to welcome with open arms. It did not take long before he asked her to move in with him. After getting to know each other more deeply, his masterful persuasive skills convinced her to relocate to the city where he lived. Together, they welcomed new members into their growing household. First came a small, energetic hound dog. They fell so deeply in love with the breed that they soon decided to adopt a second one, with this woman by his side. He truly felt as though he had found the final piece of his life's puzzle. He always spoke of her with the highest praise, giving her sweet, affectionate nicknames. He simply could not conceal the intense emotions pouring from his heart. He was completely, undeniably in love. Her quiet demeanor seemed to anchor him, providing a solid foundation and a strange, beautiful sense of peace. The man had left his old life behind, journeyed to a new land, and discovered an entirely bright and wonderful future. If 6 years ago, while dancing with his sister at her wedding, he was still dreaming of finding his own special someone, he was now preparing to stand at the altar to marry the absolute love of his life, a dedicated nurse. It was a gorgeous day in November of 2013. Many family members and dear friends traveled great distances to share in his joy on this monumental occasion. He transformed that day into an incredibly special and memorable event for every single person in attendance. Their wedding ceremony took place right in the comfort of their own home. It was an event so beautiful that anyone present could easily see the overwhelming love radiating from the smiles and eyes of both the bride and the groom. Shortly after exchanging vows, the newlyweds decided to move once more, seeking a forever home where they planned to spend the rest of their days. Their new house sat right near the state border, nestled peacefully on the banks of a picturesque lake. The scenery was as perfect as a painting on a postcard. The stunning ocean blue house rested quietly on a sprawling piece of waterfront property, exuding an absolutely mesmerizing charm. They happily set about renovating their new nest, meticulously decorating the interior with his extensive collection of art pieces and precious antiques that he had spent years acquiring. He was a man who deeply cherished objects with personal history. He took immense pride in his possessions. For every single item held a unique charm and its own distinct story. Moving to this new location also allowed the couple to fully indulge their endless passion for the wilderness. Whenever there was a fun, outdoor activity to be enjoyed, he was invariably the first person in line, brimming with eager enthusiasm. The new geographical location also brought the couple much closer to his extended family. His nephew by marriage, who had wed his niece in 2010, shared that they began gathering frequently once the couple moved into the area. They would go out for lovely dinners, attend lively concerts, and celebrate special events together during every holiday season. Their new sanctuary was also just a short 30-minute drive from the wife's own son and grandchildren. The couple never turned down an opportunity to babysit and care for the little ones. He had a particularly wonderful gift for entertaining children, because deep inside that large, imposing man lived the joyful soul of a child. He was always more than willing to drop down to the floor to play silly games with the kids. With children running around, their household was never devoid of bright, ringing laughter. Videos captured him hilariously trying to demonstrate how to do the limbo, while 2 twin granddaughters watched with amusement. He enthusiastically explained the rules, showing them how to bend backward and inch their way under a low wooden stick. Even though his wife laughed uncontrollably at his goofy antics, the children were sometimes far more interested in eating their ice cream. He loved participating in every type of game, from spelling board games to the most ridiculous childhood toys. He would eagerly show them how to spin a dial, turn plastic handles, and rest their chins on a toy frame, waiting for a surprise. He truly was like a giant, lovable teddy bear, always letting the children hang and climb all over him. His wife, too, was always ready to join in on the family fun. 5 years into their marriage, their life together seemed to be reaching its absolute peak of contentment. But then, an unexpected hardship struck in June of 2018. He suddenly fell terribly ill. He complained of severe dizziness and constant vertigo. He mentioned that his ears ached and that he felt overwhelmingly nauseous. The situation grew so dire that he was physically ill right in their front yard. His wife appeared deeply worried and heartbroken for him. She knew that he had experienced brief bouts of sudden dizziness in the past. He shared that he felt unimaginably exhausted and completely confused about what was happening to his own body. His final memory before the illness took over was working out in his beloved garden, when suddenly a wave of nausea, dizziness, and a splitting headache crashed over him. He guessed that perhaps he had suffered from severe sunstroke after working too hard under the blazing weather. Drawing on her professional medical background, his wife determined that the absolute best course of action was for him to rest quietly in bed. He later recounted that after he lay down and closed his eyes, the very next time he opened them, 36 full hours had vanished. This alarming incident caused his youngest sister a great deal of anxiety. She immediately called her sister-in-law to ask for details, because a healthy man suddenly losing consciousness for 36 hours was an incredibly abnormal occurrence. The wife soothingly reassured her that he was doing fine and that she was constantly by his side, diligently monitoring his condition to ensure nothing serious happened. Although he had never experienced an illness quite this bizarre before, his wife remained firm in her belief that he was simply suffering from extreme exhaustion. His family felt somewhat relieved knowing that a wife with professional healthcare knowledge was right there to care for him. It seemed as though his boundless, ever-burning energy was finally beginning to slow down as the years went by. However, just 2 weeks later, the wife's dedicated care seemed to have worked a miraculous cure. He had fully recovered, bouncing back to his old self, a man overflowing with dynamism and vitality. He even took it upon himself to organize and host a grand, spectacular party to celebrate the 4th of July holiday. The gathering was absolutely flawless, matching the splendor of any event he had thrown in the past. He remained the perfect host, welcoming, warm, and deeply affectionate. Every single guest had a truly marvelous time. Everyone watched in delight as he danced with his wife amidst the festive joy of the celebration. He naturally pulled her close, and those around them happily joined the rhythm. The sight of them hugging and kissing so affectionately led everyone to believe they were deeply immersed in profound, unbreakable love. Everything in their home seemed to be functioning beautifully, and no one harbored even the slightest shadow of a doubt about a long, joyous future for the two of them. Yet, a terrible storm was secretly gathering. On the 21st of July, 2018, an urgent emergency call was placed to the local county dispatch center. Police units were immediately dispatched to the scene. The footage captured by the body camera worn by the responding sergeant recorded a truly heartbreaking scene. As the officers stepped through the main entrance, they found the beloved man lying motionless right at the bottom of the grand staircase. And tragically, at that very moment, he had already passed away. The atmosphere inside the house was utterly silent and suffocating. One could only hear the hushed, whisper exchanges of the police officers. The reason for their quietness was that the wife was standing just around the corner, weeping in a state of absolute panic and agony. The officers were deeply cautious, wanting to avoid saying anything that might further traumatize her already fragile emotional state. The lead sergeant needed to have a brief, gentle conversation with the wife to gather a preliminary understanding of what had transpired. The sergeant introduced himself with the utmost politeness and calm, informing her that he would remain on the scene until the medical examiner arrived to handle the necessary procedures. The wife replied politely through her stifled sobs, trying her hardest to maintain her composure and cooperate with the authorities. She told the sergeant that her husband had been battling severe dizzy spells for the past 2 days. She claimed to have found him on Thursday morning when he attempted to stand up, suddenly grew dizzy and collapsed. She described how she had to struggle to help him up to the 2nd floor and that he had not come back downstairs since that moment. The sergeant gently inquired about her exact whereabouts when the tragedy occurred. She explained that she had just stepped outside to mow the lawn for a very brief period, and when she walked back inside the house, she found him lying there. She said she rushed over, desperately trying to place a soft blanket beneath him to ease his fall, but all her efforts were entirely in vain. Despite being a highly trained nurse, she was completely powerless to save her husband's life. In her state of sheer terror, she said she ran out to the street to flag down a passing motorcyclist, begging them to call the emergency services. His nephew, who was actually on duty as a police officer at the time, received the devastating news from his mother. His mother called him, her voice trembling, to deliver the crushing blow that his beloved uncle had died. He was plunged into a state of absolute shock. Even though he logically knew the information was real, his mind fiercely rejected the heartbreaking reality. He immediately got into his vehicle and sped straight to the scene as fast as he legally could. Throughout the entire drive, thousands of agonizing questions echoed relentlessly in his mind, asking how and why this could have happened. Hundreds of miles away, the youngest sister also received a phone call from a nephew. The broken, hesitant voice delivering the news of her brother's death made her feel as though her entire world was collapsing. The concept seemed utterly impossible. How could a man so bursting with life depart so suddenly? She simply could not accept this cruel twist of fate. Given the vast geographical distance of the extended family, the nephew and his local relatives became the sole pillars of emotional support for the grieving wife. They felt a profound ache of sympathy for her situation, knowing exactly how deeply she claimed to love her husband. No one could even begin to fathom the psychological trauma she must be enduring after personally discovering her life partner collapsed on the floor. The wife continuously repeated her haunting fear that perhaps her husband had slipped and fallen down the long flight of stairs, praying that he had not suffered during the fall. The commanding sergeant carefully began to inspect the immediate surroundings, looking for any subtle signs that might indicate an external struggle. Although the initial visual evidence strongly pointed toward a natural passing, standard investigative procedures require them to leave no stone unturned. The sergeant cautiously ascended the stairs to conduct a more thorough examination of the upper floor. It was a somewhat tense experience, navigating through a massive, intricately designed house that felt almost like a maze to a stranger, simply because one never knew what might be waiting around the next corner. After looking around the upper level, the sergeant concluded that there were absolutely no signs of physical altercation or struggle. There was zero evidence to suggest the presence of a third party anywhere on the 2nd floor. Everything appeared entirely undisturbed. Inside the master bedroom, the bed sheets were somewhat wrinkled and messy, but they bore no marks of a violent struggle. It seemed as though determining the cause of his passing would not be a difficult puzzle for the medical examiners. The coroner conducted a preliminary examination of the body and noted a complete absence of any bruises or external trauma. There were no signs whatsoever that he had tumbled down the wooden steps. Observing how the wife had attempted to place a blanket beneath him, it appeared more likely that he had managed to walk to the final step on his own before his strength gave out and he collapsed completely. Following the initial check, The coroner offered a preliminary theory that he had likely suffered a sudden, massive heart attack. When asked about the medical basis for this assumption, the coroner explained that the specific discoloration on his face, combined with a faint line appearing across his upper chest area, were classic clinical indicators often associated with a patient experiencing a fatal cardiovascular event, returning to the living room. The sergeant softly relayed these initial deductions to the grieving wife, based on the direction of the subtle indentations on the carpeted stairs. They believed he had walked down himself rather than falling. The wife wept bitterly, stating she could not understand how he could have decided to walk down those stairs in his weakened condition, and she expressed her belief that fate had simply decided it was his day to leave this earth. While the wife tried to process her immense grief, the nephew and the family members rolled up their sleeves to help tidy up the house. They desperately wanted the living space to be as neat and comforting as possible, knowing she was entirely exhausted and still needed to rest in that very home. However, when they stepped into the master bedroom upstairs, they were completely stunned by what confronted them. The moment they crossed the threshold, an incredibly foul and overwhelming odor hit them forcefully. It was the unmistakable smell of human waste. Upon closer inspection, they discovered massive, dark stains of urine soaking entirely through the very center of the bed's mattress. This horrifying discovery instantly sparked a flood of alarming questions in the nephew's mind. He deduced that for such a massive volume of liquid to soak so deeply into the thick mattress, his uncle must have been relieving himself directly in that bed for many consecutive days. They immediately realized that the ruined mattress could not remain in the house for another minute and needed to be discarded right away. The mattress was so waterlogged and heavy that it required all of their combined strength just to haul it outside. This disturbing incident only magnified the growing anxiety and suspicion within the family. When the youngest sister called the wife later that evening to gently press for more details regarding the progression of his illness, she was met with answers that seemed entirely contradictory. Late that night, the sister asked why the wife had not called to inform anyone in the family when her brother's condition had deteriorated so severely. The wife replied briefly, stating that she had not called because she genuinely believed he was starting to show signs of improvement. She also added that he could not make any calls himself because he had been sleeping heavily and had, unfortunately, misplaced his cellular phone over a week ago. She insisted the phone had been missing for several days. To the sister, this explanation was completely nonsensical. Her brother was a man who was never, under any circumstances, separated from his phone. It was an essential tool that went everywhere with him, allowing him to handle business and maintain his constant connection with the world. From that exact second, a deeply unsettling intuition began to take root in the sister's heart. She sensed a dark, heavy atmosphere, an elaborate web of lies being carefully spun. Even if she could not yet identify exactly what the truth was, another glaring question emerged when the family carefully brought up the subject of his last will and testament. The sister and her brother had shared many serious, heartfelt conversations about exactly what his wishes were when his final moments came. He had always clearly expressed his deep desire to be laid to rest in a beautiful, specific cemetery back in his original hometown. However, when the family asked the wife about the legal documents, she coldly replied that there was absolutely no will in existence. Furthermore, the wife had already hastily arranged all the funeral proceedings by herself. She made the unilateral decision to have him cremated and scheduled a memorial service to be held on the 4th of August, 2018, right at their waterfront home. The memorial service was enveloped in a deeply emotional and somber atmosphere. Every single person in attendance carried a profound connection and a fierce loyalty to the man who had passed. It was incredibly difficult for anyone to maintain their composure, even though it was nominally intended to be a celebration honoring a life beautifully lived. No one could dispel the heavy, lingering sorrow that hung over the crowd. People comforted one another, whispering that if there was ever a time and place where it was acceptable to be vulnerable and shed tears, this was certainly it. They gathered to reflect on the magnificent spiritual legacy he had left behind, feeling a mixture of immense pride and crushing heartbreak. However, during this very memorial, the extended family experienced another profound shock when they realized the wife had already begun aggressively clearing out all of his personal belongings. She had packed up all of his clothing, his cherished memorabilia, and donated every single item to a local veterans charity. The sister nearly collapsed when she opened a closet door, only to see a long row of entirely empty hangers swinging in the quiet air. Not a single piece of fabric remained. It did not stop there. Numerous expensive watches, valuable pieces of jewelry, and incredibly, even his sacred wedding ring had vanished without a trace. The wife's rigid insistence that a man so meticulous with numbers, a former financial professional like him, had failed to draft a will was utterly illogical. The wife's rushed actions and highly contradictory statements only solidified the family's growing belief that something deeply sinister was unfolding. The entire family shared a unified thought process. They knew in their bones that behind the sudden departure lay a terrible hidden truth. They decided they must immediately contact the local medical examiner's office to urgently request a comprehensive, formal autopsy. They pleaded that, at the absolute minimum, the authorities must conduct a full toxicology screening of his blood. Fortunately, their desperate request was granted. Simultaneously, a highly experienced detective from a county sheriff's department was briefed on the family's rapidly escalating suspicions regarding the true nature of the businessman's death. However, the initial autopsy report once again pointed toward clinical signs of cardiovascular disease, and the preliminary conclusion still heavily favored a death by natural causes. But the seasoned investigators understood that an initial physical examination was never the final word. They were obligated to wait for the highly detailed toxicology results from the laboratory before any definitive ruling could be made. It would be a grueling waiting period spanning several long weeks, fraught with tension and anxiety for the family. They counted every passing day, feeling as though they were walking on hot coals, desperately waiting for the light of truth to finally break through the darkness. They held on to a fierce conviction that their instincts were entirely correct. And then, when the final toxicology report was officially returned, its contents triggered an absolute earthquake. The victim's bloodstream contained traces of various sedative medications, including herbal sleep aids, standard sleeping pills, and heavy allergy medicine. But that was far from the whole story. The most horrifying, jaw-dropping discovery buried within the report was the massive presence of a specific chemical compound known as tetrahydrozoline. This substance was the primary active ingredient typically found in over-the-counter anti-redness eye drops, items readily available at any local pharmacy without a doctor's prescription. The critical issue was that this specific chemical was manufactured exclusively for topical use in the eyes, and was absolutely under no circumstances meant to be ingested into human digestive system. Medical safety guidelines clearly warned that if even a tiny amount was accidentally swallowed, the body would react violently, inducing severe symptoms like nausea, extreme dizziness, and eventual fainting. However, if consumed in a massively concentrated quantity, it instantly transformed into a lethal, fast-acting poison. It possessed the terrifying ability to directly attack and completely shut down the central nervous system, inevitably resulting in death. The detectives dug deeper into the medical mechanics of this chemical and learned that it functioned by severely constricting blood vessels, drastically limiting the critical supply of blood and oxygen to vital internal organs, which naturally triggered a catastrophic, artificially induced heart attack. When the investigative team meticulously reviewed the body camera footage recorded by the responding officers, their sharp eyes caught a monumentally important detail. A tiny, unassuming bottle of eye drops was sitting on top of a very tall dresser inside the master bedroom. This specific location was entirely out of reach for a man who was allegedly so weak and exhausted that he could not even lift himself out of the soiled bed. In that moment, the heavy veil of mystery was finally lifted. The complete picture was now undeniably clear. This was absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, not a natural death. The lead detective overseeing the case knew it was time to bring the wife in for a formal, recorded interview. 5 weeks after the sudden loss of her husband, the wife was invited to the police station for questioning. The investigators calmly sought to understand more about the origins of the numerous medications found circulating in the victim's system. She rattled off a long, casual list of common medicines her husband supposedly took regularly, like standard allergy pills. Yet, she noticeably failed to mention a single word about the deadly chemical found in the eye drops. This specific chemical poison possessed a deeply terrifying characteristic. It was entirely colorless, completely odorless, and absolutely tasteless. These invisible traits made it the perfect, stealthy weapon for anyone wishing to poison a victim without raising any immediate alarm. The concentration of the poison discovered in the victim's blood was so astronomically high that medical experts confidently declared it as the indisputable, direct cause of his demise. It was a lethal dose, plain and simple, no matter which medical lens it was viewed through. The detectives decided to gently increase the pressure during the interview. They asked direct, pointed questions about how on earth a massive quantity of eye drop fluid could have found its way into her husband's body. They strategically floated scenarios to gauge her physical reactions, asking if she knew of any bizarre habits he might have had involving the product. She began to act flustered, stammering out a reply that she only knew the product could cause severe diarrhea if accidentally swallowed. Fundamentally, the investigative team was narrowing the case down to 2 main theories. Either the victim was intentionally poisoned in a deliberate act of murder, or he somehow drank it himself, whether by tragic accident or on purpose. To establish a clear motive, the police began probing into the hidden corners of the couple's marriage. When asked about her home life, the wife began painting a grim, oppressive picture. She described her daily existence as being fraught with anxiety, claiming she constantly had to walk on eggshells and live in fear of making a mistake. She alleged that the seemingly perfect, beloved man actually harbored a terrifying dark side. She painted him as a deeply unpleasant individual, accusing him of frequently using emotionally abusive language, yelling at her, and calling her incredibly degrading names. She claimed his temper always had a tendency to escalate, and her only defense mechanism was to try and stay as far out of his way as possible whenever he became irritated. Following this interview, the authorities immediately secured and executed a comprehensive search warrant for the couple's residence. They meticulously scoured every single cup and glass, hunting for any microscopic residue of the poison that might have been left behind. They searched for any physical documentation or letters that could corroborate the claims of a deeply troubled marriage. Right in the midst of this intense house search, the wife unexpectedly contacted the lead detective again, stating she wished to provide further information. This time, the entire conversation was carefully recorded by the police. She repeated her previous narratives about her husband being an alleged abuser, claiming it went beyond just verbal insults to physical intimidation. She lamented how the pent-up frustration from his constant berating had morphed into a massive, boiling anger deep within her soul. She claimed that even while she was tending to him during his days of illness, that intense fury continued to simmer under the surface. And then, she recounted a piece of twisted advice she claimed to have heard from an old co-worker, suggesting that if you ever wanted to exact quiet revenge on someone, simply putting eye drops into their drink would cause them severe digestive distress. It was at this exact moment that the wife dropped a staggering confession into the lap of the investigation. She admitted that upon seeing the bottle of eye drops resting on a table, all her memories of anger flared up, and in a moment of impulsive rage, she grabbed the bottle and aggressively squeezed the liquid directly into her husband's glass of drinking water. When the detective calmly asked for the exact amount she had used, she confessed that she had squeezed the plastic bottle incredibly hard, and believed she had likely emptied the entire contents of the bottle into the glass. This chillingly calm confession verified all the family's darkest suspicions. As the interview concluded, the detective softly asked her about her plans for the evening, suggesting she should try to rest now that she had unburdened her conscience. She left the station expressing a vague, lingering fear about the consequences of her actions, murmuring questions aloud about whether that specific act was truly the cause of her husband's death. It was an absolutely damning confession. However, the investigators did not immediately place the wife under arrest right then and there after she departed. They needed a brief window of time to expertly organize the case file, solidify the chain of evidence, and determine the precise legal charges required to secure an airtight arrest warrant for the following morning. But early the next day, a sudden crisis erupted. The authorities received a frantic emergency call from the neighbor living right next door to the couple's home. The neighbor reported finding written notes containing deeply desperate messages, raising immediate, severe concerns for the wife's physical safety. Knowing full well that the police would soon be returning with warrants in hand, the wife had made a drastic attempt to end her own life. She had turned on the gas valves inside the house, retreated to the upstairs bedroom, and consumed a massive quantity of various pills. Emergency responders quickly breached the home, finding her deeply unconscious on her bed. She was rushed to the local hospital for immediate critical care. After being medically treated, stabilized, and officially medically cleared, she was instantly placed in handcuffs and formally charged with the murder of her husband, along with the crime of maliciously tampering with a food or drug product. The news of the arrest was swiftly communicated to the victim's grieving family. A detective personally called the nephew, bringing him up to speed and confirming the reality of the wife's confession. The nephew had to pull his car over to the side of the road, feeling as though he had been violently struck in the face with a heavy wooden bat. His beloved uncle had been destroyed by the very person he shared his home with. When he connected the call to inform his mother, the agonizing, heart-rending screams that erupted from the other end of the line were almost too much to bear. The truth was simply too cruel to easily digest. On the 16th of January, 2020, the legal proceedings finally reached their conclusion. The wife accepted a formal plea agreement, legally admitting guilt to the reduced charges of voluntary manslaughter and illegal tampering of consumer products. Although the grand jury had initially indicted her on the highest charge of murder, her acceptance of the plea deal brought the trial process to a close. In court, she continued to attempt to justify her horrifying actions, leaning on the absurd excuse of having learned the trick from watching fictional movies, insisting her sole intention was merely to cause temporary physical discomfort as payback for their marital disputes. She stubbornly refused to admit she possessed any true intent to end her husband's life. However, these desperate justifications held absolutely zero weight with the victim's family or his vast circle of fiercely loyal friends. They universally rejected her claims that he was ever capable of abuse. They viewed her statements as a sickening attempt to assassinate the pristine character and honor of a man who could no longer defend himself. Countless individuals who had been mentored, guided, and financially helped by the businessman voluntarily came forward to testify, confirming his spectacular moral character and endlessly kind heart. They swore that he possessed an incredibly gentle soul, absolutely incapable of causing harm to another human being. Everyone firmly believed that her slanderous accusations were merely a pathetic, desperate maneuver to save herself from a permanent life sentence or potentially an even more severe punishment, relying entirely on the indisputable scientific data from the toxicology experts. The prosecution brilliantly argued that the victim had suffered through an agonizing, 3-day physical decline before finally passing. The wife's claim that she had only poisoned him once on a Thursday morning totally contradicted established medical science. Experts testified that if a person ingested such a massive dose of that specific poison, their body would shut down and they would die almost immediately. The fact that the victim was bedridden and suffering for multiple days proved beyond any doubt that he was being methodically, continuously poisoned little by little over a prolonged period. Furthermore, as an individual with professional nursing credentials, The wife deliberately chose not to administer any basic first aid or call for emergency medical assistance. The victim was known by everyone to be an incredibly neat man who valued cleanliness above all else. The tragic reality that he was left to lie on a mattress soaked in his own waste proved that he had been completely stripped of his physical ability to move or defend himself. The absence of his phone and the lack of any outside helped turn his final days into a state of total, terrifying isolation. And finally, on that fateful Saturday, she made the ultimate decision to end it all by squeezing the last remnants of the deadly bottle into his water before casually walking outside to mow the lawn, deliberately leaving her husband to draw his final breaths alone. For these calculated actions, the 53-year-old woman was sentenced to spend 25 years behind bars in a state prison. Even though she never publicly confessed her true, lethal intentions, the mountain of scientific evidence and the meticulously arranged timeline of her actions spoke volumes. The victim's family felt strongly that no legal penalty, no matter how long, could ever truly compensate for the monumental loss they had been forced to endure. The act of carefully planning to poison a life partner, followed by orchestrating an elaborate web of lies to conceal the crime, were actions a family deemed entirely unforgivable. Yet, looking back at the entire harrowing journey, the wheels of justice had very nearly been derailed, had the family not stood their ground and fiercely demanded a thorough autopsy. The death of that wonderfully generous man would have permanently been recorded as a tragic but natural medical event if the wife had simply maintained a quiet, appropriately sorrowful demeanor, refrained from immediately liquidating his personal assets, and avoided providing wildly contradictory statements to the police. It is highly likely that no suspicion would have ever been raised. While the wife relentlessly maintained that the death was a terrible accident resulting from a petty act of revenge, both the family and the prosecuting attorneys remained absolutely convinced that it was a cold, calculated act heavily motivated by deep-seated financial greed. The most glaringly obvious motive was the massive fortune the victim had accumulated over a successful lifetime, according to the specific inheritance laws in their state. When a person passes away without leaving behind a valid will, their entire estate automatically transfers to the surviving spouse. That meant if the husband died and the will conveniently vanished, the wife would instantly become the sole, incredibly wealthy beneficiary of his life's work. After navigating through all the turbulent storms of the trial, the victim's family now tries every day to heal their broken hearts and move forward on a path that no longer features the physical presence of their beloved brother and uncle. They forever carry in their hearts the bright memory of his joyful, echoing greetings, though the pain of his absence touches every corner of their lives. The thing they miss the absolute most is his warm, booming voice and his fiercely vibrant, generous personality. Whenever they speak of him, they remember a truly great man, a character who possessed a rare, magical ability to instantly light up any room he walked into. Although the truth surrounding his departure was unimaginably painful, and the fact that he was so cruelly stolen from those who loved him is an unchangeable reality, his magnificent legacy of profound love, unmatched generosity, and unyielding optimism will forever remain beautiful, shining memories. His life continues to be a powerful source of inspiration for every single person who was fortunate enough to cross his path. His echoing laughter in the bright sun will always endure, serving as a timeless testament to a beautiful life that was lived fully, generously, and with absolute, undeniable meaning. This is a story of a successful and generous businessman, a man whose presence could light up any room. His signature greeting, a booming and joyful hello, 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 would forever echo in the hearts of those who knew him. He was a man who eventually met a nurse with a heart he believed to be as big as his own. She struck his family as being very quiet, but very sweet and very nice. He fell head over heels in love. He could not hide the feelings he had for her, and he was very much in love with her. But when a mysterious sickness consumed their marriage, his loved ones just knew that there was something very wrong. Money is no protection against everything, and this was not a natural passing. But before the shadows fell, there was a lifetime of brilliant light. Welcome. Tonight, we celebrate the joining of two wonderful people. It is the 10th of March, 2007, in the vibrant city of Miami, Florida. It is a monumental day for the beautiful bride, Rosemary Clayton, and her entire family. She is finally marrying her great love, William Leslie. Walking her proudly down the aisle is her oldest brother, the 52-year-old Steve Clayton. 11 months prior to the wedding, the Clayton family had lost their beloved father. Rosemary, known affectionately as Rosie, asked her brother if he would step in and take on the sacred duty of walking her to the altar. Of course, there were a lot of tears shed when that question was asked. Rosie could not imagine anybody else standing in place of her father. When the minister asked who gives this woman to be married to this man, Steve stood tall, his voice thick with emotion, and replied that he did, in the loving memory of their father. It was a deeply sentimental and beautiful moment to be gathered at something so special, a celebration of life and love, even when their father was not physically present. With their father having passed away, Rosie's older brother Steve naturally assumed the role of the head of the family. And even though he had never had children of his own up to that point, he had always been a steadfast father figure to his siblings. When their father and mother were married, Steve was just about 2 or 3 years old. He grew up alongside 4 sisters, with Rosie being the youngest of the bunch. He was 10 years older than her. So there really was not a single moment in Rosie's life when Steve was not there to protect and guide her. Steve was her big brother, and he was her absolute hero. He was everything a little girl would ever want in an older sibling. He played football, he wrestled in high school, and his athletic prowess really made him seem larger than life to a younger sister looking up to him. After graduating from high school, Steve went on to graduate from college with a degree in finance. He quickly matured into a remarkably shrewd and intelligent businessman. Steve, along with a trusted partner, started a brilliant company called Physical Therapy Resources. Through hard work and an unwavering dedication to helping others heal, that small venture eventually blossomed into a massive national company, boasting physical therapy centers located all over the country. Rosie and Steve actually met at work originally. He was in the hospital, and she happened to be in that exact same hospital. That is how their profound friendship first took root. Steve became incredibly successful and eventually decided to sell a significant interest in the business. Basically, from that point onward, he was happily retired. His lifelong goal had always been to retire by the age of 40. He missed that ambitious target by just 1 single year, officially retiring when he was 41 years old. Selling his business freed up Steve to do absolutely whatever he wanted with his days. And what this generous man wanted to do most was to give back to the world that had given him so much. He chose to spend his time mentoring an exceptionally large group of young men. He derived pure joy from helping them start up their own businesses, or simply helping them find out exactly what positive direction they wanted their lives to follow. Steve was extremely generous, sharing not only his vast financial resources, but also his invaluable time and wisdom. Above all else, Steve always had time for his family. During gatherings, Rosie would often film as Steve playfully teased their Uncle Max. It was always a special time. Their father had not been quite so outwardly funny. He was a more serious man. Much more serious, always focused on duty and responsibility. When Uncle Max would playfully ask where all that money came from, Steve would just laugh his booming laugh, shrugging his broad shoulders. When his sister Rosie got married, it was Steve's incredible good humor that made him the absolute life and soul of the occasion. When someone called out for Steve to please get up, he needed no further encouragement. Steve was always the very first guy to get up and give a heartfelt toast anywhere he went. "Hello, hello, hello," he would say to the cheering crowd. It was always fully ad-libbed, coming straight from his generous heart. He joked that making people laugh was his way of getting away from all the heavy emotional stuff. He turned to the groom and said, "William, thank you so much. I'm not going to look at you so I do not cry." Thank you so much for making my sister so incredibly happy." He then spoke of their father, as Steve was never one to hide his deep emotions. He recounted how their father had told him, right before he passed away, to always take care of his little sister. He promised to honor their father, adding how much their father had loved Rosie. He then paused, taking a deep breath, telling the room he had to get serious for a moment. He gathered himself, smiled, and told the couple that they were great companions and great partners. He looked at Rosie with pure joy and declared that he had never seen her happier. After the beautiful speeches concluded, Steve stepped up to the dance floor for the traditional father and daughter dance. He walked up, took Rosie by the hand, and they got ready to sway to the music. But before the melody even started, the family shared a very, very powerful moment. A surprise audio recording of their dearly departed father began to play through the speakers. The voice of their father filled the room, saying that the best moment of his day was when his little girl was climbing on his knee, looking up and saying that she loved him. He said he missed those sweet days and that he loved her too. There was not a dry eye in the venue. Steve had so many vital duties that day. He stepped in as a father. He was the best man. He was the pure entertainment. He was a vital anchor that kept everyone calm and a joyful spark that kept everyone laughing. He was an absolute natural at bringing light into people's lives. Despite his immense success and his close, supportive network of family and friends, Steve's own romantic life had historically been somewhat rocky. He possessed a huge heart and always looked for a partner that was as fiercely focused, determined, loving, and caring as he was. And realistically, that is a very tall order to fill. Now, 52 years old, his loving family figured it would take a very special and unique person to finally sweep him off his feet. Rosie believed Steve was always searching for somebody on a higher level, someone he could truly connect with emotionally, intellectually, and spiritually. 3 years later, the family thought that was exactly what had happened. In late 2009, Steve made the bold decision to leave his familiar home state of Florida. He was looking for a refreshing change of pace in the beautiful landscapes of North Carolina. Steve really loved being physical and active. He loved going for long walks. He loved absolutely anything that had to do with being outdoors in the fresh air. So, when he moved from the sunny coast of South Florida up to North Carolina, he found the perfect opportunity to be outdoors a lot more. Within just a few short months of settling in, Steve joyfully announced his family that he had met someone very special.